We're delighted to have you here today. My name is Colin Canning. I'm the principal investigator on this project called BeFore, Anti-Bullying Education for Sports Coaches. I want to start with just giving a basic overview of what's happening today. So you all know in regards to speakers, we have Professor James O'Higgins-Norman, who's UNESCO Chair on Tackling Bullying in Schools and Cyberspace, who is going to welcome and launch the event. We have Zach Moradi, Leitrim Hurler, who's going to speak on his own personal experiences. We've the Director of Sports Ireland, Michael McGeehan. We've Brenda O'Donnell of the Cara Sport Inclusion Ireland. We've Dr. Olivia Hurley, who is from IADT. And finally, at the end of the day, we will have Hannah McCormack from Tackle Your Feelings, Rugby Players Ireland. So I would just like to welcome Professor James O'Higgins-Norman to launch the event, and I'm looking forward to the day.
Thanks, Colin, and good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to Dublin City University, and on behalf of the entire team in DCU Anti-Bullying Centre, I want to say that we're absolutely delighted to be part of this project and involved with this project. And I want to say a special word of welcome to the partners who have trusted us, given us their trust, and decided to travel across the world and be part of this project with us. So, I mean, people have come from as far away as really exotic places like Limerick, and of course then Sweden and Austria / Germany / other places, and Spain as well. So to specifically call out the European Network of Sports Education, University of Limerick, Friends, and University of Murcia, you're welcome, and thank you for joining us on this project, and of course then also more locally Sport Ireland as well. It's a really important project for us. I was saying at our meeting yesterday that we have been hoping to do something in this space for a number of years, and it took a few different moving parts to kind of stop moving in order for us to be able to acquire funding, to be able to look into this space a bit deeper in terms of bullying and harassment and well-being related issues in the sports arena. I was talking to somebody the other day about sports and voluntary organisations and the issue of bullying, which can happen there as it can happen anywhere. And the person said to me, it's not like a job, or it's not like a child who has to go to school that they go in and they've no choice really but to be there. If you're in your job and you're not having a good time, you can't just walk out because you've bills to pay and whatever. Whereas with sports, it's a hobby, or it's a way of kind of filling in time, whatever. But I said, no, you're wrong. I said, like most people I know who are involved in sports, they're compelled to be involved in sports. There's a nearly a level of vocation about it, and it's not just something that you can walk away from if you're having a negative experience. So it's all the more reason if people have those feelings of being compelled to be part of something they feel is nearly their calling in life, all the more reason that they're able to do that in a safe environment. And who more important than the coaches across the different sectors of sporting to create that environment for them. So this project will make a really big difference in terms of enhancing and building on the wonderful work that's already happening in sports organisations around Ireland. And I know that Colin and Brendan and Siobhan have already reached out to and are connecting with all the major sports organisations here, but also across the European Union and as far afield as Sweden and even Limerick. So it's going to be an amazing project, and I'm really delighted on behalf of DCU Anti-Bullying Centre to declare the project launched and to congratulate you and thank you all for being here. And I hand you back now to Colin. Thank you.
I suppose I just wanted to speak about the vision of the project and where it came from. So 2 years ago, I began my work inside an ABC, and as James had said, they were looking for the right opportunity and the right people and the right time to conduct a project around sport. And I suppose I'm sport mad. I love my sport. It's been a big part of my life. and I've been always keen on having positive experiences and having something, as James said, it's a vocation, something that you'll do forever. I suppose then it came about the idea of maybe I submit an application to get some funding, and here we are today. So I was lucky enough to be supported really, really well. Sport has the opportunity to provide people, with many, many benefits, and, with positive experience and promoting that inclusion, we can see this happen. So we're here to develop an enhanced coaching capacity, in changing behaviours and promoting an inclusive environment. And that was just my vision for the project. I'd just like to hand over to my colleague Brendan O'Keefe now from the University of Limerick, who will speak on the goals of our project.
Thanks a million, Colm. I'm under strict orders to stay right behind this microphone so everyone can hear me, and as a teacher I've a tendency just to veer off, so if someone sees me leaning to the side you might just keep me in check. Look, I over the course of the next 2 or 3 minutes, I'll just provide a brief overview of some of the key aims and objectives of the BeFore project. But before I do, I want to start by thanking the team in ABC, James, Colm, Siobhan, and all the rest of the team over the course of the past couple of months since I've started collaborating with you. I've seen the work you do, and I know the centre will make a great lead for this project. So my background is physical education, teacher education, and the principles of sound and inclusive pedagogy that we promote with our students every single week, for me, are very much the same principles that should be promoted on the sports fields, no matter what sport you play. And a lot of these will form the bedrock of many of the resources that we will produce throughout the course of the project. So when I'm thinking about the aims and objectives of BeFore specifically, it's quite simple. Our aim really is to improve participants, whether that be coaches and players' experiences of sport. And oftentimes we hear the phrase that in projects like this, that we really want to achieve impact from the grassroots up. But that is actually quite literally a key objective of the BeFore project. So our football pitches, our basketball courts, our athletics tracks, that is where we want to achieve impact with some of the key work packages that I'll outline for you. So those work packages. So we've divided, the project itself is made up of 4 key work packages, the first of which is going to be based on a report on research and best practice. And as James mentioned, we're joined by wonderful colleagues from 4 partner institutes, four other European countries, and we're going to take a good look at what is best practice in those 4 countries and try and develop a report based on that. Work package 2 is going to focus on a training needs questionnaire. So we want to ask the coaches, the people on the ground, delivering material, what do they need? What are their professional development needs? And another key pillar to work package 2 is going to be a focus on player voice. So those that are involved, whether at a younger level or adults too, to analyse their experiences of bullying in sport. Work packages 1 and 2 will then very much form what we'll be focusing on for work package 3, which is the learning and training course content development. So bringing it all together and formulating what we hope will ultimately result in an interactive online suite of resources for coaches that can be used, and again, as I keep mentioning, can be used by those delivering material on the ground. Okay, so again, a key element of this project is we're going to look at some best practice approaches to inclusive practices across 3 key pillars. And those 3 pillars are at a gender level, at an additional need or special need level, and finally then for migrants and minorities. And throughout the course of this morning, we'll hear lots more information from people that specialise in these fields through some of our keynote speakers, and we're really looking forward to that. So in summary then, ultimately, we're working towards a far-reaching, interdisciplinary anti-bullying education for sports coaches programme that will lead to better experiences for all and genuine impact from the ground up. So that is ultimately our aim for this project over the course of the next 2 years, just slightly over 2 years. Okay, enough of the talk on our end. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker today, a really special guest speaker. His story is a powerful one on the importance of inclusion in sport. It stretches from Iraq all the way to Croke Park. So ladies and gentlemen, I want you to extend a very warm welcome to Zach Maradi.
I'll keep this short. My name is Zach Maradi. I am originally from Kurdistan, and many of you be thinking, where is Kurdistan? There's 40 million of us, close to 50 I say at this stage. We're divided between Iraq, Iran, Syria and Turkey. And the reason we don't have a homeland, we were divided in the 1920s by Britain and the French. And we were promised a homeland, but unfortunately we were never given a homeland. And there's a lot of there's about 4 million Kurdish refugees that live in Europe, and as you see what's happening in Ukraine, same thing has happened to us in the last 100 years of ethnic cleansing, genocide. There's a lot, but my family became a refugee in 1981 when Iraq invaded Iran. When they invaded, our family homes was bombed, and even my grandmother, she nearly lost her whole arm. But and then when the Iraqi army invaded, they were told to move on to Iraq. So there was about 12,000 Kurdish people ended up in Iraq. And I had many relatives that got killed in that war, and many cousins on my dad's, uncles, and unfortunately that's what happens, And sometimes, I think only in the last couple of months, people starting to get to know what it's like to be a refugee, because people don't actually know till it's near their border because of Ukraine crisis. And anyway, I'll keep this short. So my family ended up in a refugee camp in Iraq for about close to 22 years, from 1980 to 2002. And from 1986 to 88, my dad was a Peshmerga fighter. And so he actually ended up fighting against Iraq and Iran, because with all my other uncles and cousins, and sometimes I have a lot of my dad's friends. There's close to around 1,500 Kurds that were in that refugee camp, and they all live in Ireland. And sometimes they all meet up, and they always talk about, my dad's friends that live here. They'd be all close to their 70s now, and they always talk about the 1986. They were saying, we fought against Iraq, we fought against Iran. How could we win this war fighting with illegal Kalashnikovs? Because they were saying we always use a phrase of words. We've no friends but mountains. Many Kurds, when Saddam used to attack us, the Iraqi government will attack us from the south, and then we'll have the Iranians attacking us from the west, and then we have the Turks attacking us from the north. And then we'll have the Syrians, and we were surrounded by, we always say we were surrounded by Arabs, Persians. We couldn't beat them in a war, but we could. One thing about us, we always kept our Kurdish language alive, and they were always trying to change our culture. And one thing we did, we always kept our language, and we just wanted. We don't want really a Kurdistan, but if we were treated equally, we wouldn't be looking for a Kurdistan. And so anyway, in 1988, when the Iraq-Iran war ended, and my dad just gave up. Obviously, he had a couple of young kids at that age. We were based in Kurdistan, Kurdistan's in northern Iraq. And so they snuck back into the refugee camp. So they had nowhere to go. And so then obviously the UN came to rescue. And in 2002, we came to Ireland as a political program refugee. And we ended up in lovely Leitrim. And I always say life begins in Leitrim. And the experience moving to Ireland, it was an amazing journey, because I remember, and I was trying to look back, I was an 11-year-old when we left. It was just, we were surrounded by oil fields, and coming to Ireland, it was just green, and it was just beautiful. It was two different types of smell. You were smelling petrol and gas over there, and then coming here smelling the cows. But yeah, and then obviously when I came here, I didn't speak a word of English, and then when I started in the school, and it was a bit of hard work from the start, because I was speaking Kurdish and I was speaking a little bit of Arabic, because in Iraq we were surrounded by Arabs, as we say, and a lot of my parents and my older brothers would all speak 4 languages fluent, between Arabic, Farsi. But they mightn't be able to write in them 4 languages, but they'll speak it fluently. So when I started in primary school and started off playing hurling and Gaelic in St. Mary's in Carrick-on-Shannon, and from there on, kind of life just started to kick in, and sports, hurling and Gaelic, played a big part, especially in my family. And we made more friends, and a lot of the jobs all my family got, it was the same in Leitrim. Then we moved to Dublin, same thing because of sports. And we integrated quicker because of sports, because when we were in a refugee camp, I remember if you could about 40 to 50 kids, we'd be playing soccer, and we'd only have one football between about 50 of us, and we'd play about 10 aside. Every 10 minutes we'd take turns. But that football brought that 50 kids from that refugee camp, and we were all from different parts of Kurdistan, of Iran. And we ended up becoming closer because of that football. And then it kind of reminds me in Ireland, when I was in Carrick-on-Shannon, when I was playing Gaelic and hurling, it was the same thing. Not everybody that played hurling and Gaelic that was from Carrick. They were all from different parts of Leitrim. And even when I was down there playing hurling, and you had fellas from North Leitrim, South, West, from all over the place. And to me, it was amazing what sports does, especially GAA for me. It's my love, and so I've been here close to 20 years, and hurling and Gaelic and sports, soccer, running. I played all sports, and that kind of has brought me closer to Ireland, and I feel I have a Kurdish blood with an Irish heart. I'll keep it. I could go on here all day, talk about my family and history and sports, but I'll keep this short. Thanks for having me.
I suppose just a word of thanks there for Zach. Very powerful story. I suppose it shows the power and effect that sport can have, and that's why we're here today. So just to welcome our next speaker, we have Director of Sport Ireland Coaching, Michael McGeehan, who's going to speak to you now. Thanks.
Left one. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience here today. We've got, I see representatives here from National Governing Bodies of Sport. We've got LSPs, Local Sports Partnerships represented. Sport Ireland is represented, Sport Ireland Coaching. And we've got obviously the partners from the various institutions involved in the BeFore project. And it's great from my own point of view. This is my first conference in person in 2 years. I struggled to put the tie on today because it's definitely the first time in 2 years that I attempted to put one on. Colin promised me that he was going to wear one as well. So that's why I wore one. So it's all your fault. Today I'm going to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Sport Ireland coaching and what we do. And who we are. I want to talk a little bit then around the whole area of bullying in sport, the work that Sport Ireland does around safeguarding, and what Sport Ireland coaching does in the space with the various programs and resources that we've developed. And then finally, I want to talk just a little bit about the project itself and what we, from a Sport Ireland coaching point of view, hope to work in partnership with the project team, and what we hope to deliver out of that with the NGBs around Ireland. So, a little bit about ourselves. I suppose we weren't always known as as Sport Ireland Coaching. We were established in '92. As the National Coaching and Training Centre, or NCTC for short, and we're based down on the campus of UL. So at the time we were set up, we had a remit to develop coaches and coaching on the island of Ireland, and we also had the remit for the non-financial end of the carding scheme. So that was, we offered services to carded athletes from a rehab, prehab point of view, from a fitness testing, blood testing, access to sports psychology, sports nutrition, taking bloods and whatnot. So you might say, well, did any coaching take place in Ireland before 1992? And it certainly did. There was a lot of good work in coaching, but I suppose with the establishment of the NCTC, it formalised coach education to a certain extent. So we developed the Coach Development Programme for Ireland, which laid out and signposted for the various governing bodies of sport what we expected of them in the development of coaching, and then what they could expect of us. So we spoke about things in it around course development, around tutor training. These are the people that coach the coaches. And then we spoke around quality assurance, what's wrapped around the delivery of the coaching courses. And then last but not least, the certification piece. So that was 92. Then around 2008, we decided that, I think it's time for a name change, because there were probably two reasons for that. The first one being that in 2008, the Sports Institute, the Irish Sports Institute of Sport, was set up on the campus in Abbottstown. And the function that we had, which was the non-financial end of the carding scheme, that responsibility moved to the Institute of Sport. So our sole focus then was on the development of coaches and coaching on the island. Around the same time as well, in 2008, the government introduced the national car test, and there were a lot of national car test centres being set up around the country, which again was NCTC for short. And myself and Declan and a few other members of NCTC at the time were being asked onto various coaching panels around the country, and invariably they would have an independent MC there. And a few times we were introduced as representing the National Counter-Terrorism Centre. So I suppose a lot of the NGBs that we work with might have felt that we treated them like terrorists at times in trying to get their quality assurance right. But we decided it was time for a name change. So we changed the Coach in Ireland. So we do exactly what we said on the tin. So that was 2008, which also coincided with our development and launch of the first national coaching strategy. Then around 2012, 2013, there was a new Sport Ireland Act, which dissolved the Irish Sports Council, and we were given a once-off opportunity in Coaching Ireland to become part or be integrated into Sport Ireland. So we took that opportunity, and in effect we become the coaching arm of Sport Ireland. So we're their reference point in all matters related to coaching. So that's a little bit about our evolution, and then a little bit about what we do. So everything we do is underpinned by currently a number of documents. We've got the action plan from the department that sets out at least 30 actions in a number of areas to do with the development of sport. There are a few specific actions in that related to Sport Ireland coaching, one of which was the development of a Sport Ireland coaching plan. We're also then guided by the Sport Ireland strategy. That ends this year, 2022, and just in the last week or two, we've started the process of developing our new strategy. We also have the CDPI, which I've already mentioned, which signposts responsibilities for NGBs and ourselves. And then we've got our coaching plan. And the building that's in the centre of the photograph there, that's the PES building in Limerick, for those that are familiar. In my time, it was called the Thomond College, and that's where I went to college and did PE. We've been there since 1992, and that was up until the 1st of January of this year, when, because of space issues within the PES department, we've been asked to move out. So we're currently office-less, so we're still working from home, even though restrictions have been lifted. But we found a new office space on the campus of UL, which we hope to move into at the end of April or the start of May. So we look forward to welcoming a lot of people in the audience here who represent the various NGBs. So our vision is that good coaching makes the difference. Not good coaching makes a difference, but good coaching makes the difference, because we feel that a good coach, good coaching, that's the difference between someone getting a good introduction to a sport, whether they be a child or an older person, and that with that good introduction, they get a lifelong love for that sport. Whereas the opposite happens as well with bad coaching. We turn someone off. They don't want to go back to the sport. They don't want to get involved again. So our mission is to have a trained and qualified coach for every participant, player or athlete, relevant and accessible education, training, qualifications and support for every coach, which is where I see the outcome of this particular project fitting in. And then common national standards for coaching, education, training and awards. Back in 2019, we became recognised by the QQI, the Quality Qualifications of Ireland, as a service provider. So that means that we're allowed to put qualifications onto the National Qualifications Framework. Just 2 months ago, we got official word that our first course, which is our Coach Developer course, the Coach Developer course has replaced the tutor training that we have. We've just been told that has been recognised on the National Qualifications Framework at level 7, which is degree level, and 45 credits. So this isn't common knowledge as yet. We haven't publicised it, so I'm just letting you know, giving you a heads up, and we'll be publicising this in the next week or two. So we expect a lot of interest from the various governing bodies of sport that we work with, who have current coach developers, but also have tutors who have qualified through us in the past. Our goals are to lead in the development of a sports coaching system, raise the standard of and recognition of coaches and coaching, support the development and delivery of more training and learning opportunities for all coaches and to make these more relevant and accessible, implement appropriate and accessible supports for new as well as experienced coaches. And again, with goals 3 and 4, I see this project fitting nicely into those. And we want to be a leader in the delivery of education and training in the sports coaching sector. So just a little bit about bullying. Bullying, wherever it is, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's at school, at home, on the sports field, online, it's not acceptable. And particularly bullying in sport, which is what we're talking about, it's definitely not acceptable. But all of us, have a part to play. We know that children with a disability from an ethnic minority or from the LGBTQIA+ community are more vulnerable to abuse, are more likely to be targeted. So all of us has a part to play. So whether that's you being in a club, being a club official, whether you're a participant, a coach, a volunteer or an official, whether you're a child or whether you're a parent or a guardian, everybody has a part to play. I was asked last week to chair a meeting, an underage forum actually, to do with fixtures in Donegal. And it was to do with underage fixtures from under 9 to under 17. We had about 30 clubs present face to face in the room, and we gave the meeting 2 hours. So we reckoned it would take 2 hours to agree on the format for the competition ahead. So lo and behold, it only took an hour to sort out the fixtures, and the next hour was spent talking about referees. And it wasn't solely to do with lack of referees. It was, what are we doing to protect referees? And I know Maggie Farley's down here, and it's great to see you, Maggie. We're talking about the referees and the abuse that they were getting. So this was coming from the floor. What are we doing about it? And there was a lot of good discussion around some initiatives that some of the clubs were taking, like silent sidelines and whatnot. But then they asked me as chairman, had I any views on it? So I just asked them, which clubs here have policies in place to do with codes of conduct? For example, codes of conduct or behaviour for their parents, for coaches, for administrators within the club. And 100% of them put their hand up and said, yes, we've got those in place. So even though the policies were in place, they didn't have the appetite to enforce those particular policies. So they knew what the problem was. They had the solution in their hand, but there wasn't a general willingness to address the issue of bullying. So a lot of great work is going on with NGBs, and I see Garage down here who's done great work within the GAA in the whole area of anti-bullying. And we have an expectation from a Sport Ireland point of view, which I'll go into in a moment, that every organisation has a policy in place, which they do have. So we expect coaches to lead by example, promote an inclusive culture, welcome diversity, challenge bullying, and report it to the children's officer if there's one in place. For the children, it's very important that they're listened to and receive support when bullying occurs. And for parents and guardians, that they know and play their role in addressing bullying and are supported then when it occurs. And that's both for the victim and for the bully. So what are we doing in this space? So Sport Ireland, for example, offer guidance and bullying to the sports sector. And this is led out by Sport Ireland Ethics, by the Ethics Department within Sport Ireland. This effectively is a template for an anti-bullying policy. And as I say, many Irish sports organisations, from the very large organisations down to the very small, and we deal with over 60 governing bodies of sport, they've taken the template and tailored it as necessary to suit their particular sport. So Sport Ireland expects that all sports organisations have an anti-bullying policy in place, and this is part of the assessment which all organisations are required to conduct to meet their obligations under the legislation, Children First, which guides us all in this particular area. So what are we doing from a Sport Ireland coaching point of view? Well, we've developed a number of education workshops and also resources in the area that are very much child-centred and around the development of a safe environment. And I know a number of the speakers today are going to talk about that safe sporting environment and how important that is. We deliver those particular programmes and resources either by ourselves in person or online through the local sports partnerships, through the national governing bodies of sport, and then through the third level colleges. So what are we doing in the coaching children and youth area? In 2020 and 2021, we developed the Coaching Teenage Girls Workshop. So this was a collaboration between ourselves, the Federation of Irish Sport, the Life's Too Good Foundation, who are based in the west of Ireland, in Galway, the Women in Sport programme, and then led out, I suppose, and developed by DCU with Anya McNamara, and her team, who developed the resource and delivered the training for the coach developers in that particular workshop. Those of you that are involved within Camogie will know that before Christmas, Camogie have taken the Coaching Teenage Girls workshop and resources and tailored them to their own particular needs and developed or rolled out 28 workshops between November and December. And again, it's also been rolled out to the LSP network. We've partnered with Jigsaw to develop the online resource of One Good Coach. And 2 years ago with IRFU and Swim Ireland, we piloted that particular course, which is helping coaches have a greater understanding of mental health. And it was evaluated by UCD, by Dr. James Matthews out there. So moving on from that, Horse Sport Ireland have taken it and adapted it for their sport. The JA have it in place, IRFU have it in place, and other NGBs are coming on board. So this is the first step in our partnership with Jigsaw in the whole area of mental health. We hope to, with IRFU, develop a course that's aimed more at the professional player as well, and some of the issues that they have regarding mental health and the pressures that are on them. We work with the Sport Ireland Ethics and NGBs in Behaviours and Attitudes Survey. And with Athlone IT and Dundalk IT, they've taken our Coaching Children resource. We signed an MOU with them, and they deliver that programme as part of their postgraduate courses in sport. We also had collaborations, and Vicky Guy is here from Sport Ireland Coaching. She's worked very closely with the Women in Sport in the development of the Women in Coaching Toolkit. And we've also worked with the Youth Leader Awards and UL in their MSc and Applied Sports Coaching. In the whole area of disability, Declan O'Leary here from Sport Ireland Coaching leads out from a Sport Ireland point of view on the policy on participation in sport by people with disability and the development of the various e-learning resources that we have around that. And then finally, we're very proud of the relationship that we have with the Erasmus Plus programme. And it's great to see the European partners here today. And I suppose it's great to see Louis. Louis is an old friend of ours who represents NC, but he's also a partner with us on a number of projects that we're involved in. And I know the quality of work that Louis produces, so it's good to see you. So the main 4 projects that we're involved with at the moment, it's a little bit small there, but the first one is I Coach Kids, which is in its second iteration at the moment. So originally we got funding for I Coach Kids, which was looking at 6 to 10 or 11-year-olds. We produced a number of MOOCs online, which are free, and any of you that are interested, you can get it on icoachkids.eu.org. We then were successful in getting a second tranche of funding for the I Coach Kids project, which is currently up and running and will be finished by the end of this year. And in that, we're looking at an older age group, but we're also looking at talent academies and what happens as regards best practice around Europe. And we've just been told in the last week that another application that we've made for I Coach Girls has been successful. And again, that'll be publicised in the next week or two. With the ECDA, that's the European Coach Developer Academy, we're involved with Paralympics Europe in the development of a hybrid education for coach developers. We haven't met face-to-face yet. We have a number of meetings online, but we hope to pilot online in September and then in face later on in September in Poland, the first pilot of the European Developer Course. With Louis and a lot of other partners, we're involved in the PEAK project, which is almost close to the conclusion of it with the report that we're going to do. But we've looked at various issues around coaching and best practice in Europe, and we're making recommendations in areas such as women in sport, in the area of coaching disability, and how we deal with refugees, migrant workers coming into various European countries. And finally, the Blueprint project is a partnership we had with Europe Active, where we looked at taking a qualification from the fitness industry and one from the coaching industry, and to see if we could align them directly onto the national qualifications framework. So, Sport Ireland Coaching, because of our involvement in Europe, we've also been involved with a number of expert groups, and again, Louis has sat on those. But in 2020, we were part of a small working group that produced a white paper on guidelines regarding the minimum requirements in skills and competencies for coaches. And I suppose this is just to highlight, how we can influence policy at European level by being involved in these European expert groups, but also we're accessing what's best practice across Europe, and we can filter it back into the Irish sports system. So we're saying that all coaches require much more than basic knowledge about the techniques and tactics of a particular sport to be effective. Okay, there's a lot of soft skills that they need as well. So we've made the recommendation that you need sports delivery, you need safeguarding, welfare and integrity, and also you need to develop and manage positive ethical and developmental relationships. So with sports delivery, you'd say, well, yeah, that's common sense. That has to be part and parcel of a coaching course. Safeguarding and welfare and integrity, we're talking about developing a safe environment for physical activity and sport. Dignity, rights, safety and the well-being of all participants is key. First aid knowledge, safeguarding knowledge and protection of minors and vulnerable adults. Special needs awareness, educating, protecting, detecting and acting against threats to the integrity of the sport, particularly fair play, anti-doping and match fixing. So that's a lot more than you're going to learn on most coaching courses, and there has to be additional education for the coaches to give them the confidence to actually tackle some of the issues that we're highlighting. On the last point then, the creation of positive working relationships and motivation through leadership, communication, conflict management, cultural awareness, sensitivity and openness to diversity, principles of inclusion, understanding the personal background of their participants and the willingness to listen. And Zach mentioned refugees coming into various countries, and it's becoming, it's increasing obviously with what's happening at the moment. But one of the key pieces of the research that we took out in this work, in the development of the white paper, was exactly the challenges for coaches in countries that had an influx of either refugees or migrants into the country. So there's the cultural differences, obviously language, religion and whatnot, and how the coaches are trained up and armed to deal with that. So the BeFore project itself, already Colm has outlined the key outcomes of it, but from our point of view, we're really looking forward to the development of the resources from the particular project. And the programme will provide innovative and continuous support to both coaches and sports organisations to tackle bullying issues and improve socialisation and reduce marginalisation. So we certainly in Sport Ireland Coaching look forward to assisting the project team in disseminating the programme to the various NGBs and LSPs on the conclusion of the project, because embracing the education and skills of coaches in this area will further develop the confidence of the coach, and that's the big piece of feedback that comes back to us, is coaches not having the confidence to deal with particular issues. The confidence of the coach in building a safe environment, ensuring that children get a good introduction to and foster a lifelong love of their sport. So I suppose the key message that I want to maybe have you take away from here is that let's play our part, okay? Whether we're an NGB and we've got a position of responsibility in the NGB, whether we're a club and we're a club official or we're a coach on the ground, let's play our part. Let's address the issue. Let's meet it head on. And let's erase bullying from sport. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the speakers. I'm certainly looking forward to them. And I'd like to thank Colm for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. There we go. Okay, so our next guest speaker is Strategic Operations Manager with Cara Sport Inclusion Ireland, and her guest note is going to focus on inclusion strategies for individuals with disabilities in sport. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Brenda O'Donnell.
Hello everybody, hang on now. Welcome, it's great to be back in a room, as Michael said. This is my first conference pretty much since the lockdown started, so it's lovely to be back in person, and hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation today. I'm presenting on behalf of Cara Sport Inclusion Ireland, and we do focus on disability, but I suppose what I want you to take from the presentation today is that the ethos around inclusion covers all populations. So while I may speak about disability today, going home from today, remember that what I'm showing in inclusion strategy can across all different populations. So.
My name is Martina Thompson and I'm a teacher here in Presentation Primary School. In my junior infant class this year, I have a set of twin girls. Their names are Freya and Sophia, and Sophia is a wheelchair user.
My name is Sophia and I'm 5.
It's important for me that Sophia is part of the PE class because she is a class member just like everybody else in the class. It's important that Sophia is incorporated and has lots of exposure to PE because I wanted her to feel just as included in the PE lesson as her sister Freya.
I like to play with my friends. I like to run around.
The other children absolutely love having Sophia in the class. In PE, Sophia gives so much to the other children in that she can show them that regardless of having a disability, you're able to participate in everything else. For her as well to be able to participate in the class, she is able to gain so much from it, from her upper body strength that we're trying to develop, the fundamental movement skills for her, while she might not be running or walking, for her it's better control of her wheelchair, better stability, being able to turn, being able to stop, being able to brake. And overall, her overall confidence and self-esteem, I would say, has improved greatly.
I like playing with my sister because it's fun. I like playing because it makes me strong.
If I could give some advice to teachers who have a child in their class with disabilities, I think I'd say try and think of simple things. It's the simple things that can make a huge difference to inclusion. It doesn't have to be the most advanced or the most difficult lesson that you can do. It can be the simple lessons with just a little bit of tweaking, and it's just the simple things sometimes that can make a huge difference and really help Sophia be included in the PE lessons.
Everyone can play.
So a little bit about the video. I suppose it's a nice set the scene video to show the impact of being included in a class, what it's like for Sophia and Freya to be in a class and be in the PE class with their teacher, but also as two sisters being part of that, and not to feel excluded at any part of that. You know, you see the happiness in Freya's face at the end of the story, you know, that she just wants to play. And I think, you know, on Michael's point earlier on in the presentation is that we can all take a part in this. You know, being a teacher or being a coach, you have the skills of being a coach or a teacher. You've learned it through your education. Sometimes it might be about, you know, thinking a little bit outside the box, but you have the skills and knowledge already as a coach or as a teacher or as a parent to be inclusive. So a little bit about CARA. I suppose we're a pan-disability national organisation. We have a headquarters in Tralee, County Kerry, but also a base in Sports HQ in Abbottstown, of which I'm based. And very simply, I suppose our vision as an organisation is about putting disability sport and inclusive physical activity at the heart of our nation. And I suppose we work collaboratively with a lot of organisations, including Sport Ireland Coaching, national governing bodies of sports, the local sports partnerships, and an array of clubs across the country. So I suppose as much as possible, anything we do project-wise, we work in conjunction with them. Most importantly, I suppose, around the whole area of inclusion is that we work closely with people with disabilities. So rather than assuming what they would like, we reach out to them, we also speak to them on their behalf. And the strategies that I'll talk you through today, our Sports Inclusion Disability Charter, is a tool that came from the voice of people with disabilities. They developed and they came back to us saying what it is they would like sports organisations to do to make them more inclusive. So what I'm going to bring you through today is that charter, what it looks like, and then two small projects that came as a result of that charter development and the need for what NGBs were asking for and how do you make this happen. So our core beliefs, opportunities should be provided for all people with disabilities, irrespective of the nature and degree of their disability. And very similar, Colm spoke about the core beliefs of the BeFore project, and very similar in that we want to provide education and training to whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher in a school setting. It's about creating that education around inclusion. What does it look like to have somebody with a disability in your session, or whether it's your PE class? We want to, I suppose, provide information around the barriers that clubs or NGBs are, possibly putting in place as a result of their coaching. What are these barriers and how can we eliminate them? And then access to lifelong participation should be facilitated. So allowing somebody with a disability to participate at a level of their choice, but also in a sport that they choose. So rather than being prescriptive and saying, well, it's only X, Y, or Z that you can do, that we open up all our sports and our clubs so that there's an opportunity, whether it's through coaching or participation, that a person with a disability can actually be involved in it. So a few little stats, just to give an overview, I suppose, of disability in Ireland. And these aren't sport specific, but they give you a general idea of where we are with disability in the country. We have 643,131 people with disabilities in Ireland, and that equates to roughly in and around 13.5% of the population. And the last point there, you'll see that by 2026, they say that this will rise to 20% of the population. So it's quite a substantive number of people in the country that can be involved in sport and possibly aren't. 54% of the population with a disability are aged between 19 and 65 years of age. And a person with a disability then, in general, is less likely to have a degree or higher education qualification. So 13% of the disability population versus 25% of the mainstream population. So a few more stats. Individuals with a disability are far less likely to be active in sports than those without a disability. And the stats on that, pretty much as you'll see, are quite low, 27% versus 49% of the current population. So those with a disability that are involved in sport versus club members, so 33 of those without a disability. And children with a disability are less likely to be active within a community-based sport than children without a disability. Okay, so the gradients across disability and mainstream populations, whether they're in school or in a club setting, there is a big difference between them at the moment. And I suppose the last 2 years haven't helped those stats either, so we're trying to kind of re-energise the sports sector to not forget that sector when they're kind of returning to sport as well, to remember that we were inclusive before the lockdown happened. And we have done an awful lot of work in this area just to remember those little things that when you're kind of reintroducing people back to the club settings. So in general, I suppose, when Colin and Brendan asked me to present today, it was all around strategies for inclusion and what do they look like. And I suppose when you Google a strategy or what is a strategy, a lot of NGBs come to us and they'll say, what does it look like or what should we be doing? And it's pretty much, I suppose, I've just lined out all the words that you kind of do see when it comes to strategies for inclusion, and sometimes they can be very off-putting. So we don't know what that is, we don't have any actions mapped out. But very simply put, it's about planning for the future. What is it that you want to provide as a club or a teacher, being a teacher in your school setting? Where do you want to be, whether it's in 1 year time or 5 years time, with the inclusive element of your programme? Does it look like you'll have your kids totally included, or your adults participating, or is there volunteer opportunities within that sector as well? So what I'm going to go through is pretty much what we did to bring about that information block for national governing bodies. First of all, I suppose what we did was we talked to the right people, and at the very start, I suppose what I alluded to is that talking to people with disabilities was really important for us. As an organisation, we don't want to assume that we know what people with disabilities want. So by reaching out to them, talking to them, finding out exactly what it is that prevents them from possibly participating, or what are the reasons that they do participate. We get them to identify the goals and objectives. So by being part of a sports club or being part of your PE class, what is it that drives you to being there? What makes you happy? What is it that you get from it? Do you strive to be competitive, or is it a recreational basis that you're being there? So most importantly, and I think the last 2 points as well, is for us is feeding back on the work that we do. So by developing a sports inclusion charter, it was very important for us to go back to the people with disabilities and actually show them through their voices what we developed. What is it that the population as a mass were saying about what they wanted included, and engage them in that delivery process. So once I go through the charter, I'll go through a campaign, the I'm In Too campaign, and show how we use the voices of people to disabilities to, I suppose, sell the charter to national governing bodies, but to also show the impact of what it meant to people with disabilities. And one of those videos was one of the very first ones you've seen there. Okay, so the charter, I suppose the development side of the charter was a nationwide focus group, and we relied heavily, I suppose, on the national sports partnerships and the SIDOs within those counties. And for those that aren't familiar with the SIDO term, it's the Sports Inclusion Disability Officers. across the country. Most counties have a SIDO in situ, and they would have a remit and focus on disability and other population groups. So we took a range of disabilities, everything from vision impaired, hearing impaired, right through to intellectual and physical disabilities. And we spoke to quite a number of individuals that were active and both inactive to get the perspectives from both. What is it that's preventing me from going to my local club? What is it that stopped me from being part of the PE programme in school? And there was a range of adults, children, and then parents of children also. So we had 22 focus groups were carried out across Ireland, 140 people consulted and across 24 counties, and in total then 18 disability organisations and services. So they ranged from the likes of the national disability services like Enable Ireland's Cope Foundation, etc. So within those focus groups, we spoke about the experiences that people have had in their clubs and bring about the positive, I suppose. We did want to hear about the positive stories that people had, but we also wanted to hear of possibly negative stories, the impact that those negative experiences had, whether they turned up to clubs, whether they were turned away at the start, or whether they were told they'd never participate. We spoke about the benefits, and I suppose we brought that level of information to the focus groups as well, and shared why the benefits of participation in sports is important, but we also got the feedback of why people thought they should be active. Did they see that there was a benefit to being active in physical activity? The challenges, and pretty much I suppose across any population group, there is challenges, whether they're physical challenges or whether they're psychological challenges or whether they're attitudinal. It's finding out what were those challenges that this group were meeting. Facilitators, who I suppose for this group were the key drivers of their participation, and I suppose I always think back to a conference that we held with Jason Smith years ago, and he stood in front of the group and he spoke about the one PE teacher that he met when he was in school, and she urged him to participate in school, into the PE class. She urged him then to go to the actual local athletics club, and from there his career took off, and that one person had a really key message from that no matter he had a disability, he still could participate in sport. And it was to find out whether those facilitators were parents, whether they were coaches, whether they were teachers in that setting, and who were the key drivers of pushing those boundaries for this group. And I suppose the last one was wishes. What wishes did somebody with a disability, what was it that they want to attain? Why do they want to participate in the club? And those little wishes of, I want to be able to join my peers on a Friday evening, whether it's bowling or basketball or playing a game of GAA, what were the simple wishes that they wanted to get out of this? So as a result, this is what came out of all that consultation. And this is what people with disabilities were asking people within a club setting, within a national governing body, with a local sports partnership, within a school setting, etc. This is what they were asking them to do. So openness, very simple, is basically having that open-minded approach to being understanding of people with disabilities. So first of all, having the consideration that it's possible, we can actually open our doors, and that there's avenues for participation, volunteering, coaching, etc. within what we do. People, and this refers to upskilling and training of people within your sector. So as a national governing body of sport, or whether you're a sports club, do the staff and the volunteers and the coaches within that setting understand what inclusion is? Do they understand what disability is? And what it means to actually just think a little bit outside the box? Okay, the activities, and pretty much develop and deliver inclusive activities. So if, for example, you're delivering a women in sport programme or a men on the move programme, is there an inclusive element to those programmes as well? Are you considering that somebody with a disability can participate in this programme? So considerate of the whole ethos of inclusion around all your programmes, not just disability-specific programmes also. Facilities, and this one I suppose is one that needs a little bit more work depending on the age structure of where you take part in sport or if it's a new build. But facilities, consider if you can go to a facility that's more accessible, that's wheelchair accessible, that has lifts, that has hoists, etc. Far more people can gain access to that activity. Just be more considerate if you're holding a meeting that it's not on the second floor without a lift that has no access up to it, so that people can gain access to where you have your meetings, where you have your sports clubs. And promotion, and I think I always say that promotion is probably one of the most important of these charters. And I see Declan nodding here in the audience as well, that you could be and have all of these in place, but without the promotion and letting people know that they actually exist, they don't fall anywhere. And it's about using the positive images. So putting an image on a flyer if you're hosting a summer camp, that an image paints 1,000 words. So a parent that receives a flyer through the door with a wheelchair user or perhaps somebody using a walking frame, instantly they know that that activity is accessible to everybody. Okay? So a little bit about, I suppose, what came out. Let's see, do I have a video? I just want to play this first before I do that. This is a video, and I suppose it's a tool that came out of the Charter as well to share the information of the Charter to organisations, but it's been delivered, recorded and developed by people with disabilities themselves. So they're telling us what it's needed. So I'm just going to play and we can...
We all know why it's important to be active, but if you're a person with a disability, it's often not as easy to get and stay active. Everybody deserves the opportunity to have an active and healthy lifestyle. The Sport Inclusion Disability Charter aims to change this. Developed by people with disabilities, here's what it's all about. It's all about being open. Welcome us to your club or facility like you would anybody else. If you're unsure of any supports or needs we may have, just ask us and we'll gladly tell you. Hi, I'd like to see this.
It's about people. There are lots of different training options and supports out there to help you, your staff or volunteers. Find out what's best for you and book into it straight away.
It's about your activities. Sometimes all it takes a very small change to make your activity more open to everyone.
It's about your facility. Take a look at your facility and the equipment you use. Something as simple as a change in layout can make all of the difference.
You ready?
It's about promotion. However, you normally advertise your activity if it's social media or a poster or your website. Just let me know. I'm welcome to come along.
Okay, we're ready to go? Let's do it. By adopting this charter and making small changes in these 5 areas, you will be playing your part in making this a reality. To find out more, go to coracentre.ie and sign up today.
Okay, so nice little short video that I suppose kind of gives a nice approach. It's from and listening to the voice of people with disabilities and a nice step through. And as you said, for anybody that does want to access it, it is on our website. It's downloadable and there's a kind of a template of intent once you sign up to it to start the process of inclusion across your club and NGB or classroom setting. So currently on the Charter itself, we've 1,700 organisations signed up to the Charter, and they range from everything from GA clubs to national governing bodies of sports, local sports partnerships, schools, teachers and multinational companies as well. So I think that the broad spectrum of this as well is that it's not just sports related, and I think we've always said we've worked with a number of national governing bodies of sports that are working through the journey of inclusion. But they've applied the principles of the Charter across their Women in Sport programme or their children's programmes or their Men on the Move programmes, etc. There's so much kind of relatability across, not just with the disability sector. So I'm just going back to the previous slide. I suppose as a result of the development of the Charter, and it was fantastic when we launched it, we had a real good uptake across national governing bodies and the LSPs. But the one thing I suppose they came back to us is say, how do we actually implement this? How do we put it into practice? How do we develop it? One tool that we did develop was the I'm in 2 videos, and you've seen one at the start with Freya and Sophia, but there's a number of videos on our website that just kind of, very simple, like Geraldine, she relays the message of what happened to her, why she was probably discouraged in sport, but what it meant to her to get back involved and what she does now to kind of keep herself motivated. We have a number of stories or blogs that we reach out to people as well with disabilities, find out where they're coming from, what it means for them to be part of their local basketball club on a Wednesday night, and the impact it has then going into their school setting. Okay, so again, they're all accessible through our website. Let's skip that slide. So the accessible, as I said, NGBs kind of came to us and were saying, okay, we've signed it, but what really does it mean for us that we've signed it? Where do we and how do we implement this? So as a result, I suppose, we developed a program called Accessible NGB and LSP at the moment. And it's a strategic inclusion tool. And I suppose that's why I'm here today in support of what we do with NGBs to bring them on the journey of inclusion. So the LSPs and NGBs identified a need that they wanted to be inclusive. And over the last 2 years, I suppose NGBs had a little bit more time to actually reflect on the whole area of inclusion, which is a really good thing, that the journey of inclusion has really grown across a number of organisations for us. We took a trip to Wales, and some of you may be familiar with a programme that they run, which is called In Sport. So it's modelled on the programme of inclusion. They have been running In Sport for 20 years. And very similar to that process, they work with national governing bodies of sports through a principles approach of achieving objectives and signing up to principles of charter. So again, we had the charter in hand, so we felt that it was the best place to start as the charter. So your intent to sign the charter was your first stop, and then to work through the objectives. So we've built, under each of the 5 headings, a number of objectives for NGBs or LSPs to actually attain. We bring them together at the end on what we call a panel. And we have experts, just say, from national governing bodies of sports or disability sport organisations who listen to the journey that NGB has taken or the LSP has taken on what they've done across those 5 headings to actually achieve the objectives. Now, it's not a kind of a pass or a fail or that, no, you're not there yet, but there's recommendations given to the NGBs if we feel that there's a little bit of scope or a little bit of room for them to improve across any one. So we have currently 7 national governing bodies of sports that are on the journey with us. Some have achieved the bronze level, they're now progressing to the silver level. And we have 22 local sports partnerships that are on the bronze level award, and hopefully that they'll have signed off by the end of May. So as you can see, it's a journey of inclusion, and it really is about bringing the organisation across a number of different areas, but also kind of developing that culture aspect with them. So attaining inclusion from the top down, looking at their boards of management. Is there somebody on the board that's representative of disabilities? Do they understand what their organisation should be doing? And I suppose for a long time, NGBs kind of would have looked at it and said that's that person's role, but we're trying to create a culture where the boards take responsibility at their every board meeting for inclusion. So it's working through top-down approach and working through the objectives of the Charter. So the key impacts, I'm just looking at my watch, I think I'm okay for time, am I? Yeah, a few more minutes. But these are just the last few slides. The key impacts, I suppose, we've seen for the accessible toolkit is that it's a whole organisational approach to inclusion. So I suppose it's fantastic we have a number of SIDOs across the county, but within that journey and their journey with us, they've learned to kind of understand that, okay, I am an expert in this field, but I need my fellow peers and development officers to also take responsibility of inclusion when they're developing their, whether it's a women in sport programme or whether it's a child Pacific basketball programme. It just doesn't fall on one person. And it's the same with the NGBs. There may be an identified lead in this area, but can everybody within the organisation now look at inclusion? You know, make sure it's on your monthly staff check-ins, make sure it's an agenda item on your board. So we've seen an increase in delivery training and pathway development, and this is pretty much, I suppose, simple disability awareness opportunities, getting staff, volunteers, coaches and parents within whatever setting you're in, get them trained up in disability awareness, getting them to understand that it's not something to be scared of, but also the simple and little things that they can actually do. Introduce them to a few concepts, just say like our continuum, so somebody with a disability can actually participate at whether it's an integrated approach or whether they want to be a disability-specific sport or whether they're with their peers and included in a wholesome setting. Okay, so community of practice, I suppose one good thing that has come out of it is that all of those national governing bodies of sport, all the LSPs and anybody that's signed the Charter is on that journey. They've created a kind of a network They have their own Facebook page. They also have a WhatsApp group, and they share the ideas. So some NGBs may be struggling in the area of just say writing their policy of inclusion. What does it look like? What other organisations have gone before and what have they done? Who did they engage with, etc. So it's creating that community of practice that they're not out there standing alone trying to do it, that there's other organisations on the same pathway. So increased responsibility for inclusion across all levels, and I've said that before, is that whole organisational approach that is from the top down, making sure that organisations can actually, set it out from the start what they're actually going to and their intent to do. And closer links developing between NGBs and LSPs. So by bringing the two networks of NGBs and LSPs together, they are now kind of, beginning to sing off the same hymn sheets. The NGBs are relaying the information to the local sports partnerships, and vice versa, then that information is going to club level. Okay, future plans. I suppose the future plans on it is that we'll continue to expand the reach and scale of accessible. So obviously, we're a small organisation, we're limited in the number of staff that we can actually network across the NGBs, so we slowly invite the NGBs. So hopefully we'll have another 3 NGBs on our inclusion pathway. We're currently in the middle of developing an LMS to manage the administration of the accessible programme, so that there'll be an online portal to allow upload of information, but also the dissemination of information that's related to it. Rollout of accessible toolkit, hopefully nationally this year. So although it won't be a kind of a panel approach and hand-holding kind of exercise, the LSP network and the NGBs will now have a toolkit that they can go to their clubs with. So a club resource where club secretaries or volunteers can now look at what it is that we can do to open our doors to be more inclusive. And then explore the potential to develop similar toolkits along the leisure sector and outdoors. So obviously a lot has happened over the last 2 years in the outdoor sector, and we've recently taken on an inclusive outdoor coordinator. So we're hoping that through that role, we'll also develop a similar toolkit to allow outdoor bodies like the likes of Quilcha and Togish and anybody working in that space to actually begin to consider what it is that's needed in this space as well. So I suppose this is the last slide, and it's just a summary of that strategic approach to inclusion. First of all, I suppose it's to reinforce that positive culture, and I think that's really fundamental here. It's that it's not led by just one person alone, that there's a top-down approach to the delivery of inclusion. And whether that's with the disability sector, I think it's the same across all different populations. Promote the physical activity is for everyone, and this is really, everybody can do it. Michael said it at the end of his presentation that sport is for everybody, sport is for all. Even Freya said it, she wants to be involved, play is fun. So it's about making sure that everybody knows that message. It promotes a healthy lifestyle thinking, and it promotes inclusion in the community. So once a local sports partnership or your local sports development officer begins to have that inclusive element in their programme, it becomes a set thing. It becomes recognisable by whether you're a parent or a volunteer, but it becomes recognisable that it's something that you should be doing. Increases the numbers of participating in sport and physical activity, which is what we're all here to do, is get numbers into our clubs, numbers out walking, numbers out running, getting them to understand that it should be part of everybody's day life. Promote education to enhance coaches, and Coaching Ireland here and through Declan and working with Declan and Vicky, they're both here today, is get coaches to recognise that this is something they should be considering as well when they're in their coaching session. What is it that we should do to make it a little bit more inclusive for somebody? And then promotes education to people with disabilities and the values of sport. So, although we're doing all of these good things from our perspective, we also need to educate people with disabilities that there is a value for them to be part of our club, value to be part of our national governing bodies, value to be sitting on our boards of management, letting individuals know what it is that they're looking for. Through the development of what we have, an active Healthy Me programme, and we deliver an education programme directly to people with disabilities in disability services. So we're now beginning to kind of actually get into people with disabilities and let them know the value and how easy it is to do it. And I think that's the message, is just about where they can avail of these opportunities, how easy it is, and who they can contact. So on that note, thank you very much. I hopefully shared a little bit of information around the Charter, the inclusion, and what it means to consider that whole area of inclusion and what it looks like. Yes?
I know it's all Q&A, but just to make a point and a question. As part of the licensing system for access for people with disabilities, because you can't get into this building for the simple reason that the push button for the wheelchair access is broken. Nor can you get into the National Arena in Abbottstown, the Medicine Arena, because they don't have door openings for wheelchairs. So I think you should look at that as well. Access licensing for facilities. So all very fine having it on paper, unless it's in practice.
Yeah. Look, I suppose we don't per se do a licensing system for facilities or venues and stuff. We do work closely with Ireland Active in relation to their Active White Flag Award, and they have a grading system in relation to those of different levels of accessibility across their bronze, silver and gold. It's possibly something, I suppose, to look at. It's the universal design with the National Disability Authority. It's a very big undertaking, and I suppose one we're currently working with Sport Ireland on the national database that I'm not sure the date of when it's proposed to be finished, but that database will also look at the accessibility of whether it's a greenway, whether it's a facility, whether it's a beach, what does it look like, and what are the criteria that you should have in place. So the database may go a little bit towards making people more aware of what they need. The questions will be on that questionnaire when it goes out. But yes, I agree. Yeah, if people, I think we noted the facilities is one of the areas on that charter that if people can't gain access to where you're training or what you're doing, there's no point. Yeah. So thanks. Thank you. Okay. Is there anybody else that has any other questions? I thought I saw Vicky's hand going up, but no. No. Okay. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank Brenda. We're going to take a break now until 11:30. There's tea and coffee outside for everyone, and on our return we have two more speakers who will be speaking, Olivia Hurley and Dr. Hannah McCormick. So thank you. We'll just take a break. We're just going to continue on with our last two speakers. So I'd just like to introduce Dr. Olivia Hurley from IADT. She's a sports psychologist. I'm delighted to have her here. I'm really looking forward to her talk. I'm sure everyone will take a lot away from it. So just a warm welcome to Dr. Olivia Hurley.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Now, I'm going to be one of those really horrible people, and I'm going to put this back on, but I'll keep it off just for a moment, just for the purposes of, I think, pictures and video or something that people want to take, which is fine. You can do it now for the first 5 minutes, if that's okay. So I've been instructed as well. I'm a former sprinter. Two things. First of all, I ran for Ireland, but I could talk for Ireland, so I was told to keep it brief. And the other thing is that I was told I like to be a moving target. And I was told I'm not supposed to move from the podium because I can't move away from the mic, which is also not what I'm used to. So added to all of that, as I say, joking aside, thank you so much for the lovely invitation from Colm and the team here at DCU to come and speak to you today. I suppose one of the first things I'd like to say is, the title of my talk, Colm again and the team said you've got free rein, you can talk really about whatever you like, which is never a good thing, because you always prefer to be instructed as to what you should really be speaking on. And I know Hannah and other speakers are coming after me and have been on before, and they've been brilliant, so no pressure whatsoever. So I suppose I came up with this title because I wanted to give you a little bit of background to so interested, and I suppose jumped at the chance to speak when Colm invited me as part of the team to come along today and help with the launch. I think it's a really great study, really great project. I think it's really valuable. It's going to be worth a lot, I think, moving forward within the whole context of sport in Ireland and many things. I think I probably came on Colm's radar because I've done recently some podcasts and various things, particularly dealing with the likes of referees. And we know that they've been open to quite a lot of abuse and quite a lot of negativity in recent times. In fact, they were even, they were out on strike at one point, and rightly so for various kind of reasons. So I think it's really timely that this project is starting, and no better to lead it than here in DCU with their sport kind of affiliations and background. So I chose this title to have fun and thrive, not just survive, and then creating what I consider to be one of the things that I'm really passionate about. As a sports psychologist, I work with loads of athletes and loads of different teams and different people organised or involved within organised sport. And it is about trying to create what we call these challenging but supportive environments, okay? So the first thing I want to just ask you all is, I'm sure you're obviously, you've taken part in sport, or you are sports people yourselves, or you're involved in organisations or whatever it might be. Ultimately, why did you get into sport? Anybody? Be brave, brave action.
Just to have a bit of fun.
Exactly. Who am I speaking to there?
It's
Maggie. Exactly. To have fun. Okay? And I always tell the athletes that I work with, whether they're at novice, intermediate or elite level, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it? So that's why something like bullying in sport is such a big deal, is that we don't want our children and our teenagers and our adults seeing sport as a chore or seeing it as something that they're just trying to survive as opposed to thriving and having fun in. Okay? So, is it okay if I put the mask on now? Is that okay? Now you'll hear me fine, don't worry. I am well used to projecting my voice. Can everybody still hear me okay? Yeah, see. Perfect. Okay, so just to say as well that if anybody wants to contact me after today, some of the research papers that I'm going to just refer to, they are available to you. I've chosen 2 that are based around kind of, open access. They're not like, subscription journal papers, so you don't have to pay for them. But if anybody has any interest after today and wants to contact me, my social media and my email address is there, and it'll be on the last slide as well. And please feel free to drop me a line if there's anything that I can do to help and support any of you in your various sport organisations, okay? So what am I going to do today? I'm going to talk, I know the grey background is a little bit, I kind of went away from the white because it kind of was too bright. And I said that'll blind them. So I kind of toned it down, but if it's a little dark, my apologies. So what I want to talk about today, any good lecturer will tell you that you should always set out some objectives when it comes to your particular presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of base it around kind of 4 key things. And first of all are 5 key things to define what is bullying. Okay, now I'm sure many of you know what bullying is, and you've probably already have definitions of that from earlier today. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about what are the traditional cyberbullying, which maybe has been mentioned, but maybe not. And then just 1 or 2 little things about sport-related bullying as well, okay? And then I'm going to just mention just 2, because I don't want to make it too academic, 2 studies that have been done very recently, one from Spain and one from Lithuania, actually. Nice to include a study like that, considering what's going on in the world, and from that part of the world, they're doing really good research. And they've done 2 really good studies, one based around athletes and one based around coaches. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Then I just want to distinguish between the different types of environments within sport, okay? And they're the ones that we as sports psychologists would be having identified, then would be saying there's kind of one that's a gold standard, which I would be saying for the project and for everybody here today, is the kind of sport environment you should be encouraging your organisations to develop, okay? And then when I explain which one that is as the gold standard, I'll explain what its defining features are. So in other words, the one that is this really high challenge, high support type environment, what we call a facilitative environment, okay? And I can see there's some familiar faces in the audience who might have heard of some of these things before. And then finally, again, trying to keep within the theme of what today is all about, give you some advice on, maybe even getting ahead of Colin and his team and trying to start implementing some of the things that you think might be useful or helpful within your own organisations, and encouraging coaches and athletes and all of the people involved to try and, I suppose, aim towards developing these type of environments, okay? So, again, that might be a little bit dark, but just to say, we all know what bullying is, okay? So bullying by its very nature is, I suppose the key thing is that it's a behaviour that it's intended to harm, okay? And it comes in various formats. So we've got physical bullying, that kind of, which we're all traditionally very used to, hitting, those kind of behaviours, but also things like exclusion, which is social bullying, and then things like our other examples there, like verbal and physical, obviously name calling, things like that, okay? There is what we always should be aware of, and that is this mismatch or imbalance of power, okay, this dynamic that happens with the victim and the perpetrator, okay? So it's very important that we know that there's an aggressor and there's a victim. Now, there's one thing about the bullying literature that is actually interesting, is that we've always said that it's behaviour that occurs repeatedly. But actually now what a lot of the research is saying is that it can be bullying even if there's only one incident. And you should be able to catch that incident, and then it shouldn't escalate if you get it in time. So it shouldn't be that it's for a sustained period of time, but only one incident is enough for to be able to say that is bullying and to call it out. Okay? So we need to be aware of that, because a lot of the literature and the definitions, there is no one agreed definition of bullying universally, but these are the kind of common features. But a lot of them say that it has to be repetitive over time. And now we're actually saying, no, one incident of bullying is enough. That's it. It doesn't have to be that the behaviour is continuous over time for us to label it as bullying. Okay? Now, cyberbullying is all of what I've just said, but within the cyber world. So using your iPads and phones and devices. And the difference is that it doesn't need that explicit interaction between the individuals. So that physical bullying doesn't kind of occur, obviously, in the cyber world, but the social bullying and the verbal kind of abuse, that's what happens. Now, just one thing I want to mention in relation to sport before I move on, and that is we need to be aware of the type of bullying that we're talking about here. So one of the things that we use as two ways of distinguishing it is horizontal and vertical bullying. So horizontal bullying is what we refer to in sport as athlete v athlete, okay, on that same level. And then vertical is where we're talking coach athlete, where it's top down, okay? So we need to be aware of all the different types if we're going to try and develop something that's going to tackle all of these things, okay? So that's just a little kind of a explanation before I move on to anything else. So this is one of the first studies that I just wanted to mention to you, okay? It's a really recent study, okay? And it's available in the journal called Frontiers in Psychology. Now, if any of you are interested, if you go into Frontiers in Psychology, you just Google it. It's an open access journal, and you could get a copy of this paper. In fact, I was going to bring a few copies today and print them off, but I actually just wasn't able to get the printer working earlier on. So I said, well, I'll have to just refer to the web link, and they can actually access it themselves. So you can go in and look at this journal yourself. It's not subscription-based. It's very good. It's peer-reviewed, and you can always tell how well the journal article is doing because it'll show you how many hits it's had, which is always a good, kind of indicator of how interested people are in this particular topic, okay? So this was a study that was done. It was a qualitative study, which means that they did what's called semi-structured interviews, and they interviewed just a small number of athletes in Spain, okay? Now, they weren't top elite athletes. They were kind of a mixture of intermediate and some higher level athletes, a mixture of males and females. There was more males than there were females, and it was quite a young demographic, okay? So it was kind of that early kind of, adulthood kind of age range. The aim of the study, which is obviously what we're interested in today, was that they wanted to identify what are the characteristics of bullying that these athletes were talking about, and then how did they themselves deal with the bullying that they were experiencing, and what was the consequences for them. And I know Hannah is maybe going to talk a little bit about the mental and the psychological impact that these specific type of toxic behaviours have on athletes, okay? And it's probably reflective of what maybe Hannah's going to say in terms of what this study found, okay? Because the study found, one of the most interesting ones when I looked at this was that the bullying behaviour, the location of it was really interesting. It happened in the changing room. And I've got a lovely quote that's going to emphasise that from one of the athletes, okay? So we need to be aware, where is the bullying happening? As a coach or as an administrator or as an organisational person, you often might not even see what's going on because it's kept away from you. You're not in the changing room. And yet the changing room is one of the places where people are at their most vulnerable, particularly from an athlete perspective, okay? Where you're changing and where you're kind of exposed in many ways, okay? The thing that they also noted was that the athletes, there was no kind of real definition as to who was bullied, and that we often think that the victim of bullying is somebody who is an athlete who maybe isn't as proficient in their skills. Actually, in this particular study, athletes who are very proficient and the top athletes were targeted in the same way as some of the athletes who maybe were not as kind of elite in their skill set. And that's really interesting because that means that it's kind of mixed in terms of who's the target. So there's no one definition of it'll always be this type of individual and they're the ones we need to protect. and these people will be immune to it because they're so good at their sport. Jealousy and things like that happen, and then these really top athletes can be the ones that actually get targeted as well. And that was reflective in this study. In terms of how the athletes coped with the actual bullying, what was common in this particular study was that they used, which we wouldn't like to see, which is more passive coping mechanisms. They withdrew from sport. They avoided the situation. And that's exactly what we don't want. We want to encourage active coping strategies, which is encouraging the athletes and having coaches and parents and administrators giving the same message. Seek out support, seek out help. And yet that's still something that even in this day and age, athletes are afraid to do, and they don't do. Okay? And then finally, the last two things in terms of consequences of the bullying itself in this study. First of all, psychologically, they were more, I suppose, exposed to things like feeling afraid, feeling sad, hypervigilance, in other words, always being on alert, seeking out and looking for the threats in their environment, which is not a good thing for any young adult or teenager to be exposed to and to be doing within their everyday lives, okay? So they're the kind of things that we know bullying has in terms of consequences for the athletes, okay? So this was a really interesting study, and as I said, I was going to mention just one key thing, and that's this lovely quote from one of the athletes, which I think was one of the key things that I took away from this study, and that was, we need to be aware of where the bullying is happening. And this was where it was in the changing rooms. So the changing room is an enclosed space where no one intervenes, where no one can see you, where there is no camera, where there are no rules. That can be a jungle. Now, we've just already said at the very beginning, we want our athletes to have fun and thrive in their sporting environment, not just survive it. And yet, if you see your sport environment and the changing room as a jungle, that's you're literally just trying to survive the experience. And that can never be enjoyable for any individual. So we need to be aware of that and also know that that's where, if you're that horizontal bullying, athlete to athlete, the coach is not present. And that is a big factor as well. So we need our coaches to be ready to intervene. Now, following up from that, the next study that I'm just going to mention was a study that was done on coaches. And it was a study done in Lithuania very recently as well, where they looked at what did the coaches say about bullying behaviour and how aware were they of these behaviours in their environment, okay? There was 8 of them, again, more males than females. It was a qualitative study as well, where they interviewed them, semi-structured interviews. And the aim was to uncover the type of environment, which is going to follow on from what I'm going to talk about in a moment, that these kind of behaviours occurred within, and where the type of environment that we can develop and encourages these types of negative behaviours, okay? Now, a couple of key interesting points about this study. One was that some of the coaches that were interviewed actually regarded these, what they considered to be mild incidences of bullying, as a way to kind of weed out the players that they didn't think were particularly, suitable for the environment. So they called it the conveyor, like a conveyor belt, the conveyor principle, where they said it was kind of a version of natural selection. In other words, they excused the behaviour, okay? Now, maybe that's a cultural thing from the study taking part in a different part of the world to Ireland, but it's still a really interesting European perspective to get on this type of behaviour. The second thing that came out from this particular study was that the coaches didn't really seem to think that it was their responsibility to deal with this bullying. And actually, this quote is very insightful. In that period up to the age of 16, parents have to bear that burden, because parents primarily must teach that they can't jeer, that they have to show a good example during the match themselves. They can't shout using swear words at opponents' children. They can't let children write on Facebook what they want and how they want. It's purely parental responsibility, because the coach's job is to train. Parents educate. And I thought that was a really insightful quote from a coach of any athlete, to think that they're not in a position of, being a good role model and being able to guide and mentor these athletes. And that, yes, it is their job to educate as well as to train. But these coaches didn't seem to think that. And that could very well be the case here within Ireland as well. Coaches will say, it's not my responsibility, parents have to take responsibility. Yes, too, but not solely, okay? So that's the academic stuff, Okay, so they were just 2 studies that I just wanted to give you a quick look at, just to show you the kind of research that's been done in this area across Europe, okay? Particularly because this is a European funded study in DCU. So what are the types of environment then? I said my talk was about creating this, what I call a really good environment, a healthy environment, this facilitative environment, okay? So there's 4 types of environment that a particular researcher that I'm just mentioning on the bottom here of the screen, if you're interested, a guy called Mustafa Sarkar, okay? Now Sarkar is a really top researcher in the UK who's done loads of research around the area of resilience, how we develop resilience. Now I know we're all sick of hearing the word resilience over the last 2 years, okay? You need to be resilient, okay? That's fine, we've all done that, okay? But actually, joking aside, I know, joking aside, it's a really good talent, if you like, to develop within athletes. People think resilience is a trait. It's not. It is something that can be taught. It is something that we all can develop, okay? So Mustafa Sarkar and one of his colleagues, David Fletcher, they've done loads of research over the last 10 years in this area of resilience, okay? But they've identified, through their research, 4 different types of environment that occur within sport. And what's called the gold standard. So they've identified, and I'll just explain each one. The first is what's called an unrelenting environment. And that's an environment where coaches and organisations and even athletes themselves give lots of challenge, but there's also very low support. So think of it like a tennis player, right? And you're at the receiving end of somebody's serve. And the balls are coming at you, even like, one of those machines that they chuck the balls come at you like, quick fire. Imagine that's like what's happening. You're being challenged, but you're not getting any support. That's not a healthy environment. That's what I would actually call a toxic environment with any sporting organisation, where you're giving so much challenge to your athletes and you're not giving them the required support. And it's called an unrelenting environment, okay? Another word for it is toxic environment. Now, there's 2 other ones, stagnant environment and comfortable environment. And again, they're where, for comfortable, you're given no challenge really, but lots of support. Now, sport should be a challenge. The athletes I work with, I tell them all the time, if your coach and me and your parents, if we're not setting you and helping you to kind of, set for yourself really good targets and really good performance standards, where's the excitement and fun in you just staying within your kind of, very comfortable zone? We want to challenge you, but we're also going to give you lots of support to enable you to reach those standards, okay? So comfortable environment is where you give them no challenge or very low challenge, which they're kind of capable of, but you give high support. And maybe in younger athletes, children, that's maybe where you start from. But you want to work it up towards what we consider the gold standard, which I'll get to in a minute. Stagnant environment is where you give very low challenge and there's very low support as well. And that's not really conducive to good and fun and enjoyable and challenging sporting environments, okay? So the one that Sarkar and Fletcher, and Sarkar particularly, Mustafa would say is the gold standard, is this what we call facilitative environment, where we give lots of challenge, but we also give lots of support, okay? So if I was to ask you, what do you think are the characteristics of this facilitative environment? What would you say? So hands up. Derek. Inclusion, very good. And I know you've had a talk earlier on about inclusion. So the phrase I would use, Derek, is that we're all in this together. We all have a place, okay? So absolutely, inclusion, and there's a voice and a place for everybody. What we call a psychologically safe zone. Sport should be a psychologically safe environment. Physically safe to the best of our ability as well, but psychologically a safe zone. Anybody else? Authentic. Sorry? Authentic. Authentic? Yes, absolutely. Very good. What else?
Recognition.
Who's?
Recognition.
Recognition, absolutely, brilliant. In other words, you celebrate the wins. You celebrate even the little wins. I had an interesting conversation with somebody after the Ireland-England game last Saturday. Okay, great result. Somebody said, oh, it was a terrible performance. I was like going, how many times have England beaten Ireland under exactly the same conditions? Do you think that they thought that wasn't a great win? Absolutely. Johnny Sexton gave an interview on Off the Ball on, I think, Saturday evening. It's on Off the Ball if you want to go in and have a look on Instagram. And he said that was a game 2 years ago we would have lost. And he said, the next line, which as a sports psychologist I loved, the mental skills training that we've been doing over the last 18 months really stood to us. And he then went on to allude as to what that was. So it was brilliant that he was actually commenting on their mental skills training, okay? So you celebrate the wins and you recognise the successes. And that should be something that we definitely do. You don't wait till the end of a career or until the end of a season to then say, you know, why would young people want to take part in sport if they're not having those little enjoyable kind of moments along the way? They're the ones that help armour them against the ones that don't go so well. Anybody else?
Well, can we use my name from Sport Against Racism? I deal with young people in particular coming from diverse ethnic minority backgrounds. So there's particular skills involved in, you know, developing cultural confidence to deal with different religions, different languages.
Sure.
And building up the resilience that we talked about earlier on. You know, take that time because due to the care that the coach must have, you know, dealing with these kids.
Great, okay. Anybody else? Any other key characteristics that you think define this facilitative environment? Yep. Empower them, absolutely. Love it. I don't need to put up the next lot of points. You're getting every single one of them. In other words, letting them have what we call a say in what goes on. So you know the way we say to athletes and coaches now, give the players ownership. Allow them to be part of that decision-making process around the targets that are set for the team and so on. Really good. Anybody else? I'll say I needn't put up all the points because you're getting all of them.
Opportunities for growth.
Very good, yes, absolutely. Encouraging, and in other words, getting them to crave feedback and to seek out how to be better. Brilliant.
Demanding, pushing, demanding.
Yeah, absolutely. We should never shy away from the fact that we should challenge, but we challenge in a way that is kind and in a way that is encouraging. My mentor, Professor Aidan Moran, who, as I'm sure some of you may have heard, you know, I mean, he's literally just coming up to his 2-year anniversary, and I called him my academic dad, and I literally would not be standing here today without Aidan's mentorship. And I don't think I've ever given a talk since he passed away 2 years ago, and his anniversary is actually just coming up this week, the 16th, okay? Without mentioning him, okay? And he used to always say, you know, high challenge, high support. You know, it's always that we should be doing those things. But we should be encouraging challenge. Don't ever shy away from that. It is something that we should all do. Okay, so I think I'm just going to put up all of the different ones here, okay? And let's see if you got pretty much, I think, all of them. So what would Mustafa Sarkar say is the gold standard and the key characteristics? The first one is set those challenging goals. The individuals have input. They are allowed to take ownership of the process, and they want to seek out those challenges to help with their development, which somebody mentioned, and crave feedback. And I was just going to mention as well what Professor Aidan Moran used to say. He used to say, if you're going to give feedback, and this is a little coaching tip, if an athlete has done something really well, I'm an academic, so I, you know, as well as doing applied work, I also am a lecturer. So I have to give students feedback on their assignments, okay? And a little trick that Aidan always had was he used to say, and he was a very kind individual, if anybody ever met him, he really was that kind of an individual. And he'd say, the best feedback is the one that if you give positive feedback to somebody, for example, in a match, let's say, and you say, you did this really well, and you did this really well, and your passing was great, and you know that the athlete's maybe tackling wasn't up to maybe par that day, and you'd like them to improve on that. His little trick was, you say all of the good things, and if you say the word but, the shutters come up. So you did this really well, your passing was great, your kicking was great, but you need to work on your tackling. All the athlete hears is, shutters up, tackling was terrible. And Aidan's trick was, your passing was great, your tackling was great, and if we work on, you know, this little element, you'll be off the charts. Simple change of the word but to and. And now the athlete is still listening to you and is craving that feedback from you. So that's a really small little trick, but it's something that it worked every time he ever gave me feedback on anything that I wrote. You did this well, you did this well, and let's work on this little thing. And that meant that you were literally leaning in going, give me more, I want more feedback. And athletes, by their very nature, feedback is something that they tend to be a little bit uncomfortable with, because they sometimes take it as a bit of a personal criticism. So we need to kind of bring them with us, okay? So giving it in a way that's just positive and conducive to keeping them with you. Simple little tricks to do that. Good relationships between coaches and leaders and athletes, okay? We need to make sure that those relationships and open communication happens, okay? That psychologically safe zone, which encourages that high challenge, sensible risk taking. Do you know when athletes and young people are at their most vulnerable when it comes to risk taking? Anybody? If I said to you, what is the age range where young people take the most risks? Could you give me the age bracket that the psychology research would support? And actually, any of you who are parents, I'm afraid their brains are hardwired to do this, so you can't stop it. You have to just help to guide them through it. It's your teenage years. It's from the ages of 13 to 19. And you know where we say to young people, they'll get into a car and drive fast and have a crash, or they'll go out swimming, out of their depth. They do what we consider, and often is the phrase, "Why are you being so stupid?" I have news for you. They're not stupid at all. Their cognitive ability and their assessment of risk is just the same as yours. But they have a system. I'll give you an example. It's called it's like a cognitive system and a brake. It's like a car. Think of it like that. In the teenage years, the way the brain and the body develops, it's like we put them into a car and we give them the accelerator and we don't give them the brake. There's what's called an incentivized processing system, that they want to keep putting their foot on that accelerator, but we haven't given them the brake. And the brake doesn't develop in your brain. Evolution has to be, is the reason, as the answer for that. Doesn't develop until into your 20s and 30s. So when you say to a young person, they only got sense, they are biologically hardwired to have this incentivized risk-taking, but no brake. The brake kind of comes along afterwards. So they're at their most vulnerable, ironically, during the time where we want them to stay in sport and where we want them to be engaged in what we call healthy risk-taking. Sport is a healthy risk-taking activity. High challenge, and it gives them that buzz that maybe going out and drinking or taking drugs or driving fast in a car will, if you like, it substitutes for that. So that's why we want them taking part in sport. But many of them, they drop out of sport because they find the buzz from these other activities is bigger. So we kind of want it to be that sport continues to be fun and gives them a buzz, because we want them to stay in it, because it is the one that can give them a healthy risk-taking avenue. Okay? So, healthy risk-taking and healthy competition. John Kramer, one of my other colleagues up the north, said, never be afraid to throw in a little bit of argy-bargy and a bit of conflict and healthy competition within a team. We always think that things like, any kind of, arguments or conflict is bad for a team. It's not if it's done in the right way. But it needs to be monitored. It needs to be done in a way that it is healthy competition and healthy, that little bit of conflict and little bit of niggle that goes on, but not where it's abusive and not where it gets out of hand. Okay? So it doesn't always have to be happy in the sporting environment. Healthy competition is good. It keeps standards high and keeps people wanting to go back for more. It keeps it exciting. Everybody supports each other. And I love this phrase, and it goes back to one of the things that Derek, I think the first one, learning from each other's mistakes, encouraging those little wins to be celebrated, and a sense of we're all in this together. They are the features of this facilitative environment. High challenge, high support, and where bullying tends not to happen, because it's not tolerated. Because these features are all what characterises this environment. Okay? So, as I said, I could talk for Ireland, but I'm going to finish up on these couple of little bits of advice, okay? So how do you create this desirable, gold standard facilitative environment, okay? High challenge, don't shy away from that, no need, but also high support. We need what's called a multi-level approach. We need, unlike the coach's quote, we need our coaches, our policymakers, our teachers, our parents, everybody involved in what's going on. We also need to have really good role models. We need to give our young people examples of what is the behaviours that are to be encouraged and what is not to be tolerated. Okay? And that's where I would say that will be the challenge for this particular research team going forward, to identify what are those, role models and gold standard kind of, environments that we can all in Ireland move towards developing here. We need policy change. Okay? We need it to be that bullying at any level, whether it's at athlete to athlete level, coach to athlete level, or being, I suppose, perpetrated against our officials, that it is not tolerated and that it needs to be kind of, if you like, kind of weeded out. And that will involve many, many levels, but it is often more difficult at an organisational or a general sport level. It's easier at individual and team level, but it shouldn't be left to individuals and teams. It should be that it's at an organisation level and at a national level. We need national campaigns, like the wonderful campaign that Hannah's been involved in with Tackle My Feelings and things like that, okay? So we need a similar one that's going to look at bullying in that kind of way, where people know this is what is acceptable behaviour, these are the kind of environments we want to create, and these are not the other kind that we want to create. But we need to educate people on that.
Sorry.
Sure.
Would you agree that the transitional periods of trying to weed out that environment can lead to a lack of success, that the voice out and win, and that, where you're trying to implement that culture?
Yeah. I suppose there's no really definitive right answer to that. I think we need to be ready for that being a possibility. But I still think that you can still, if you look at what the facilitative environment is, it's still full of high challenge. So it isn't that it's not that we're lowering standards. We need to be careful about how we view that. So it isn't that we're asking people to perform at a lower level or to reduce their level of competitiveness. It's just that we're actually calling out unacceptable behaviours. And it really is that two things that I always encourage people within this environment is, and there was a study done by Google actually it was their covert, it was called Project Aristotle. It was their quest to find the perfect team, okay? And what they actually found out through their research was that really good high-performing teams, that I would say really did encapsulate this facilitative environment, they had two really good characteristics among those team members. And they were, number one, conversational turn-taking, and the second thing was that the people in the team, and this is why these are always a bit difficult and have been for young people and children. There's a test we call it reading the mind through the eyes, okay? In other words, being what's called socially sensitive. In other words, if somebody walks into your changing room and it's a teammate, you should know by their demeanour, their body language, their facial expression, whether they're having a good day or not. And actually really good functioning teams are ones where people actually invest in the individuals and get to know each other as individuals and care about each other. I say talk, TLC, talk, listen, and care about your team and your team members, okay? So I don't really think that it will be a requirement for us to lower our standards. It's just to make people more socially aware and more aware of these kind of environments that are the gold standards that can be created and give them good examples of where they do currently exist, okay? But I do think that it is a case of it is over to the researchers now, here particularly within DCU, to try to tease out what is the best way to communicate all of this information. So that's really all I wanted to say. As Aidan would always say, recap, make sure that they know what they're going away with. So hopefully you've got a better understanding of some of the research that's currently being done within this area. You have a better understanding of the type of environment that is that gold standard that we're trying to create, full of high challenge, but also high support, this facilitative environment. And that ultimately, we kind of know how we might go about doing that. But as I said, it's over to the DCU team, which I'm sure will make a wonderful job of their new research in trying to develop a strategy and policy change going forward to help all of this to actually happen actively on the ground. So that it's not just something that we, kind of speak about, but is actually put into practice and is a real, what I call, brave action. That it's actually put into place and it's action-based, applied, rather than just something that gets left on a shelf as a policy document. So listen, thanks so much to everybody for listening today. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. So has anybody got any questions? I've no idea how I'm doing on time. I'm assuming somebody would have talked. I'm spot on, pretty much. Great. I told you she could talk for Ireland, so I could have kept going, but I know Hannah has a brilliant presentation coming up. Anybody got any questions? Thanks a million for your contributions, by the way. I love where people get a little bit involved. Yeah?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the sport and coaching. Thanks for a really interesting talk. I really enjoyed your
Thank you.
today. Legend. And the question I have for you is that I really like when you put up your points that the word individual came out. Sometimes we talk about they or them, where I think it's actually very much individual. Have you any tips of how a volunteer coach working with a group of 15 or 20 youngsters can help to identify the individual needs within the group? So it becomes less they and them and you're working with them.
That's a really great point, okay? I'm sure you've heard the cliche, there's no I in team, but I would say, but there's a me. So we often forget the fact that a team, yes, it's a collective, but it is made up of a number of individuals. I think one of the best tips is that if you really want your team to perform really well, okay, it's identifying and recognizing that they all are individuals and they all bring different strengths and benefits to the team. Athletes love where they think that you are invested in them more than just as being an athlete. So if you really want to bring your team along, the individuals, you have to get to know them. You have to be that kind of real role model and mentor where they feel comfortable coming and talking to you. That can mean that things like, you know, we often talk in sports psychology about team building and kind of days out and having a bit of fun. But I think giving athletes the space to be able to talk to the coach, but also talk to each other and getting to know each other as more than just Mary who plays corner back or Johnny who plays scrum half, okay? They need to know, you know, things like where are they studying? What are their hobbies? What do they like to do when they have fun outside of sport? Because that means that then when they walk in that door on the day that you know, looking at their face, they're not having a good day, that they'll be more comfortable saying to you, well, actually, the reason why I'm a bit distracted today or I look the way I do is because I didn't sleep last night because I had a row with my mum and this is happening in my family or whatever. So they're more comfortable opening up to you about the stuff that what I consider to be that, you know, the holistic athlete is at the centre, athlete-centred approach, but where everything around the athlete, all of their personal factors and their situational factors, they bring that into every training session. They bring that into every game. Now, my job as a sports psychologist is to try to help them to not let that kind of distract them too much. But we also need to be aware that they're human and they will lose focus and how to get them to refocus. So I think that is one of the best tips that I could give, is that you've got to get to know your individuals as people before they're your player. And that often works. Thanks a million. Derek, one last question.
So both yourself and Zach, to varying degrees, mentioned some of the elements of the work at the moment, this cruel invasion of Ukraine. And it's also sparked online conversation of what athletes can and cannot say on, you know, about like politics, about their views on this. Can you comment a bit about the power that they have and what the consequences are if they do use that power and things like that? It's a bit of a topic at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, Derek, because there's many sporting organisations, even in Ireland, you know, at a very top level, where the athletes are encouraged to stick to the party line. They don't deviate from that. And that's where I would actually have, it's difficult, because at the same time as you saying you stick to the party line, and they will say, well, we want to speak out, but we are not in a position to because we're not supposed to have a political view, or it could damage my... Like athletes, ultimately, they know that if they do something that it could impact their careers, particularly at elite level. So, you know, they can be fined if they are found to, you know, bring the organisation into disrepute. I think there's a way that the athletes themselves can come forward as a collective. It's more difficult for an organisation to vilify a group than it is to vilify an individual. So I think if the athletes could come together and have a collective stand and have a collective way of speaking about what they are, you know, concerned about in terms of what's happening in the world, that would then be viewed, I think, more favourably by the upper management of the organisation. And I think as a group, there's protection in that as well. I think it's really hard for them as individuals. While we'd love them to speak out individually, I think that's a big ask in certain contexts, obviously at the more elite level, where it's their careers and their jobs are on the line. I don't think we should, we have to remember where they're coming from in relation to that. But it is something that we all need to be aware of at the moment. So thanks, Derek. Excellent. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. Have I got everything down, I think?
That's perfect. Lots of really useful nuggets of information there. So I'm just going to pop our presentation back up and introduce our final speaker for today. Super. Okay, so it's a great pleasure to move on to our final speaker and to round off our session for today. Our final speaker is Dr. Hannah McCormack, and Hannah completed her doctoral studies at the University of Limerick, and she is the current campaign manager on the Tackle Your Feelings project. And Hannah's talk is going to focus very much now, to finish off the session, on the well-being of our athletes. So please extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Hannah McCormack.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks for, I suppose, everyone sticking around. I am the last speaker today, and I know the next thing we have on the agenda is lunch, so it's really important for me to get through this as swiftly as possible. What I would say as well is I am very concerned about the well-being of the individual, and it will be about the well-being of the athlete, but it's also going to be about the well-being of you as the coaches as well. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about in my short presentation today. I'll introduce Tackle Your Feelings, what it is, who we are, and what our general aims are. Then I'm going to talk to you about positive psychology in sport, and it's really going to build on nicely from what Olivia brought up and that kind of facilitative environment, or a gold standard environment for sport. Then I want to talk to you about values, which I'm sure you all are pretty familiar with, and I'll give a few examples, and then what your role as coaches can be in, I suppose, encouraging this environment and even kind of looking after your own mental well-being. And then I'll finish with questions and some take-home messages. So first and foremost, I'm going to flip it around a little bit, and I'm going to ask you guys a question. This is not a question I'm looking for an answer for right now, but it's something that I want you to hold in your head for the duration of my presentation. And it's potentially something you can just hold in the back of your mind as we go through life. And that question is, are you a nice person? And I'll come back to it later, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense at the end. So, what is Tackle Your Feelings? Tackle Your Feelings is a positive mental well-being campaign, and we want to encourage people to be proactive when it comes to their mental health. We've all heard about those marginal gains or those 1% increases that athletes can make to become a better performer, to become a better athlete. Tackle Your Feelings is about looking at your mental health and looking at those marginal gains or those 1% differences that you can make to improve your positive mental health. We've had a lot of, I suppose, campaigns and awareness pieces around poor mental health, and I don't really need to talk a lot about how our mental health has been impacted over the last couple of years with everything that we've been through and what we're going through now. But what we want to show is that by looking at your own self, looking at what ways you can make your life better, you can improve your own mental health and well-being. You can make those marginal differences. You can make those 1% gains. Oh, it moved on too fast. There we go. So we basically look at well-being as being the balance between the challenges that you face and the resources that you have to deal with those challenges. And basically, the more resources you have, the higher your feelings of well-being will be, and the better able you will be able to deal with those challenges. Tackle Your Feelings itself enables people to build their own mental well-being resources. So just a little bit of a background on who we are. I work for Rugby Players Ireland. Rugby Players Ireland are the representative body for all elite and national level playing rugby players in the country. One of the main aims of Rugby Players Ireland is to make Ireland the best country in the world in which to play rugby. And we do that in multiple different ways, but one of the ways we do it is we look after the well-being of the athlete off the pitch, because we know that when we look after the well-being of the athlete off the pitch, it has a positive impact on their performance on the pitch. As Olivia said, athletes are humans. They are a well-rounded person. Athletics, sport, performance is just one part of their identification. It's just one part of their personality. So we want to make sure that everyone is a well-rounded individual and has the opportunity to be the best version of themselves off the pitch as well as on the pitch. Tackle Your Feelings as a campaign is actually sponsored by Zurich Insurance and the Z Zurich Foundation, who are very interested in developing and promoting the well-being of the individual. We want, through Tackle Your Feelings, to improve the life skills not only for our athletes, it's actually something that is available for the public as well. So anyone who is interested, you can. I obviously put some sort of slide moving thing on this and I didn't realise it, so excuse me while I mess around with it every so often. It is something for the public as well. It's something for everyone at every level. So not just the elite athletes. Everyone in this room can benefit from the resources that we have available through Tackle Your Feelings, and everyone who coaches anyone can also bring these kind of lessons and resources to their athletes as well. We also, as you can see, Olivia spoke about the role models before. We have a lot of Ireland's top level rugby players supporting the campaign, sharing their own experiences of mental health and well-being, both positive and sometimes negative, because we need to hear the negative to be able to appreciate and work on the positive as well. So one of the things that we do in Tackle Your Feelings, a lot of people, when it first came out, Tackle Your Feelings has been in existence since 2015, 2016, and it was very much seen as a mental health campaign. We're not just a mental health campaign, we are a mental well-being campaign. And that's because we use the dual continuum model of mental health. So you can see this is a model that was developed by a researcher called Keyes. And what he proposed is that mental health isn't just about the absence or presence of mental illness. It's actually also about the absence or presence of mental health and well-being. And you can see here on the horizontal continuum, we all exist somewhere along that line. And chances are we aren't necessarily going to know unless we have potentially experienced poor mental health or a mental illness, or we have been diagnosed with a mental illness. But we also, oh, my little things are coming up at the end. We also exist on the vertical line, which is something that we actually have a lot more control over. We can encourage our own positive or high levels of mental health and well-being. And what Keyes and his colleagues proposed is that someone who has a mental illness, or is kind of maybe has the presence of a mental illness but has a higher level of mental health and well-being. Oh, sorry. It's been a long time since I've had to press buttons in front of people. I'm usually just looking at my screen, so I can cheat by looking down here. So someone who even has a diagnosable mental illness or a diagnosed mental illness, if they have high levels of mental health and well-being, they will actually be doing better than someone who has no instance or diagnosed mental illness, but has low levels of mental health and well-being. So that idea of languishing, that is something that we've actually all probably experienced over the last 2 years. Our mental health and well-being has been impacted by COVID. It has been and is continually being impacted by what is happening in Ukraine. And that feeling of languishing, it comes across as potentially being a little less creative. It takes us a little bit longer to do the things that we enjoy. Maybe even some of the things that we enjoy aren't bringing us the same levels of joy that they used to in the past. And if you have been feeling that level of languishing, what I would say is very normal to have felt that over the last couple of years. It's not surprising given everything that we've been through and that we're going through now. But the really good news is that you have the opportunity to move yourself higher up that vertical line, back towards that higher level of mental health and well-being, and that is something in your control, and that's what we want to encourage people to see with the Tackle Your Feelings campaign. So that was a little bit of a complicated diagram. This one is a little bit easier to explain. And I really, really like this one because we talk about well-being as being the balance or the equilibrium between the challenges that we face and the resources that we have to deal with those challenges. So you can see that challenges has a big down arrow, and that's because, oh, my magical shifting thing is back again. When we experience challenges in our life, it is going to have a negative impact on our perceived mental well-being. It takes a lot of energy to deal with those challenges. And when we dedicate a lot of energy to those challenges, it negatively impacts our perception of our own mental well-being. Instead, when we but when we have resources, what that does is it boosts our perception of positive mental well-being. It can bring us back to that equilibrium. We use our resources to deal with our challenges, so it can help us feel better. But what the great thing about resources is then when we have them, if we aren't experiencing a challenge, it will continue to boost our perception of positive mental well-being. So having resources is really beneficial to ourselves, not only for when we're dealing with challenges, but just in everyday life. And I'll go through what some of those resources are, but like I said, that's what Tackle Your Feelings wants to do. It wants to encourage people to recognise that we have the ability to build and maintain our own resources. So the thing about resources are that they are plentiful, and these are just some of the key resources that have been identified, and you'll recognise a lot of them just from other, I suppose, conversations and even some of the stuff that Olivia has said. Relationships is one of the biggest influences on our own long-term happiness. Optimism, in terms of a sport, it can increase our performance and recovery. Resilience, that lovely word that we've heard so much over the last couple of years. That self-compassion, which has been discussed in terms of being even better at improving your performance than self-confidence. And then that idea of emotional awareness as well. So these are some of the resources that are out there, that are available to us. And as Olivia alluded to before, they aren't necessarily things that we are born with or without. These are all skills that we can develop and we can learn. The great thing about resources are that you can get onto what is known as a positive gain spiral. When you have resources, you are going to increase your perceived well-being. When you increase your perceived well-being, you're going to be able to develop and gain more resources. When you gain one resource, it's more likely that you're going to be able to gain another. So often a more optimistic person is actually going to be better at relationships. They're going to be able to maintain and hold on to friendships a lot better. Again, I think we've all experienced that, probably even more so in the last couple of years, and with what's going on at the moment. If you're around a pessimistic person, it's very draining of you, so you tend to not want to be around them, which then actually means that they aren't necessarily getting that support. So then when you have a surplus of resources, then you are going to move towards that higher level of positive mental well-being. So if you remember, again, we're bringing ourselves back up that vertical line to that high levels of positive mental health and well-being, which is going to be really beneficial and going to help us flourish. So just to kind of come back to this diagram again, we know with young people and with actually anyone, there are lots of different challenges that they can face. Research has actually shown for young people especially that school stress, homework and exams, relationships, friends and family, and their own health are one of the biggest stressors that are out there. And these are the things that are going to challenge their mental well-being, challenge their perception of selves. These are the things that are going to take the energy from them. Resources, however, you want to look at confidence, optimism, the support networks we have, the relationships that we have, and the resilience as a skill that we can develop. And the great thing is that we know that sport can encourage these resources. Sport is an amazing environment for which we can help not only grow our own resources, but encourage the growth of those resources in other people. So, so just in terms of then, so that's kind of what the background of Tackle Your Feelings is, and kind of where it came from. The idea of positive psychology in sport and why it is important. So positive psychology, just to give you a really brief kind of background to it, was, I suppose, Martin Seligman is known as the grandfather of positive psychology. And it was back in the early 2000s that he realized, or he was actually the president of the American Psychological Association, and he was asked what state psychology in the world globally was at the time. And he said, it wasn't bad. And what he meant is that we had historically been very focused on how we could make unwell people better, but not a lot of focus had been spent on trying to make okay people the best that they can be. And that, again, there's a huge translation between positive psychology and the sporting environment. We all want people to be the best version of themselves. Positive psychology looks at the psychological aspect. How can you be the best version of yourself? How can you live your best life? How can you live the good life? How can you achieve the things that we all have the capabilities to achieve? And that's why I see positive psychology as being the perfect, I suppose, lens to look at and to try and encourage that facilitative environment in sport. So Martin Seligman, originally his, I suppose, aim was to try and encourage happiness among people. And then he realized that happiness wasn't actually the end goal that people should be aiming for. And instead it's this idea of contentment. And he developed this model which is called PERMA. And you can see it's pretty well laid out there. PERMA is positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And I really strongly believe that, once again, this is the perfect model to look at how you can create that facilitative sporting environment, because sport is the perfect environment for people to achieve all of these pillars of positive psychology. Positive emotions experienced through sport. Again, Olivia asked that question at the start. Why do we participate? What did we get into sport for? And the reason the majority of us got into it was to have fun. We experience happiness, joy, optimism. Now, it's really important to say positive psychology isn't about just only experiencing positive emotions. Sport also helps us deal with negative emotions. It helps us deal and learn how to manage disappointment as well. But sport is a really good environment in which to experience those positive emotions. Engagement, again, talking about that facilitative environment, the challenge versus support. Flow is experienced when you hit that sweet spot between skill and challenge. And again, that's something that you can look into. We've all experienced it before, where we're potentially running down the pitch and that goal is just wide open. We know exactly what to do. Or we're running down the side of the rugby pitch. We call for the ball. We don't even have to look where it's coming from. We gather it in and we cross that try line. Whatever sport you have played or you have participated in, there is a very high chance you have engaged in flow, and usually you don't even realise it, but that is often what brings us back to sport again. I don't really necessarily have to give examples of how the relationships that we gain in a sporting environment can be life-changing, and they can be lifelong lasting as well. One of the big I suppose, pillars of the PERMA model is that idea of meaning. Again, a lot of people get into sport. A lot of you are in the coaching, are in those coaching roles because it gives you a lot of meaning. It gives you that sense of belonging. And the same happens with your athletes. They are able to feel that they belong to something that is bigger than themselves. And there's so much research out there that shows that this feeling of being not an individual who's standing alone, no man is an island, we want to belong to something bigger. We want to be part of a team. We want to be part of have that shared identity, and that gives us a lot of satisfaction in life. And then the achievement side of things. Sport is all about achievement, setting goals for yourself, setting goals for your team, and not necessarily the winning, but just improving in the skill. Every time someone goes to a training session, they can achieve something. Every time you get out of bed to go for that run, you have achieved something. Sport is the perfect environment to encourage this positive psychology model. So how can we as individuals, how can we as coaches, or how can you as coaches kind of encourage this, or what is your role in it? One of the most important things that we want to encourage through Tackle Your Feelings is the idea of identifying your own values. So values are the principles that you feel are most important in your life. They are the personal beliefs and opinions that offer a sense of guidance. So values can obviously be personal, values can be team or group based, or they can be club or sport based, obviously if you're working with individuals as well. Values are really important in the sense of they, like I said, give us an idea of how to guide ourselves through different, I suppose, situations. They can also bring in the idea of inclusion, bring in the idea of support, bring in the idea of making sure that everyone is part of the team. If you are unsure of your values, it's a really good idea to take time to assess and to check and even write down what your values are. And then look at your organization, look at your team. Do your values match or contribute to the values of the team or the organization that you're working with? Does your team or organization even have values? And if they don't, this is a really good opportunity to look at building those team or sport values for yourself. And obviously that fits in really nicely with the project that is coming up. The anti-bullying is a value I think most people would take for granted that should be embedded in your sport. But unless it's sometimes put down on paper, we aren't necessarily aware of it. One of the best examples of values and kind of team values is with the All Blacks. And I'm going to guess that I'm in a room full of coaches, I'm in a room full of people who are interested in sport. The majority of you have read or at least have heard of the book Legacy. Yeah? Okay. So anyone who hasn't seen it, read it, heard about it, you can have a look into how these values took a team who one of the best teams in the world, supposedly in 2007, who didn't really get to where they wanted to be, and how that shift in awareness of the team values, shift in awareness of what each individual contributes to the All Blacks jersey, to that jersey, to make sure that they leave it in a better place, how that supposedly brought them to winning the World Cup in 2015 and becoming one of the most successful rugby teams in history. So I'm not saying that you have to write down and write a book or produce a novel that talks about the values in your team, but it is really a really nice way to, I suppose, encourage that environment, to check in with that environment, to check in with yourself, to make sure that you are matching that environment that brings the best out of both you and gets the best out of the individual who you are coaching, who is part of it. So how do you do this? What is the role of the coach? So it is very important as a coach to just, again, be aware of your role in this process. I have the Be the One Good Adult, or as Michael alluded to before, the Be the One Good Coach. There is a lot of research out there. There is a lovely study that came out of, DCU, it came out of UCD, called the My World Survey. And they looked at the mental health of young people in Ireland. And one thing that they found was that when young people have that one good adult or the one good coach who they know can be trusted to listen and be supportive of their own mental health and well-being, that instances of poor mental health, instances of depression, anxiety are lower in people who have that one good adult in their life. Now, the majority of the young people who were surveyed who did have that one good adult in their life referred to a family member, referred to a parent or maybe an older sibling or even an aunt or uncle. But as coaches, you have the opportunity to put yourself in the position to be a one good adult or be that one good coach to the young people who you are working with. You are able to be that really good role model. You are able to look at their whole person to see how are they being as a performer, but how are they doing outside of the sport as well. Something I think that is really important, especially when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, is to potentially check your own biases. Olivia spoke about the study that was done in Lithuania with those coaches and the attitude towards bullying. We unfortunately, and we hate to admit it, and it's very hard to sometimes admit it, all have internal biases within us. And a lot of the time, looking after the well-being of someone else involves you looking after your own well-being first. Make sure that you are aware of who you are. Make sure you're aware of what biases you may have that you're not necessarily, I suppose, so conscious of, and see if you can potentially start living those values that you want to instill in other people as well. One of the key things that I will say, and it's because it's my favourite resource, because I very much believe in it, is you need to find your own support as well. You need to find your own support network. You need to find your own relationships that help you manage and deal with a lot of the things that you are going to deal with as a coach, as an individual, as a parent, as a sibling, as a partner. Without that social support, without the relationships in our lives, it can be very, very hard to navigate all of the challenges that we are facing. And it can be very hard to navigate the challenges that the young people that we are coaching bring to us as well. So you definitely need to find your own squad. Find the people who you know can help you through a difficult situation, even people that you can trust to talk about. If there is bullying in your team or in your club, how do we manage this situation? Because yes, there's a responsibility on you as the individual, as the coach, to help manage it, but it shouldn't just be down to you. In the same way that the coaches were like, well, it's not my job to teach kids not to bully people. It is, but it shouldn't be your job alone. And that's something that you want to be very aware of, that you don't have to do these things alone. There's going to be a lot of supports out there. Find the people who you know you can talk to about that. One thing I'll say, and James, who's not here anymore, he mentioned at the start that a lot of people get into sport because it's almost a vocation. It's this desire to be part of it. You aren't necessarily doing it as a job, so you can't close the laptop down and walk away. So what I will say is that self-compassion is key. And this is one of my favourite analogies, because when I first heard this analogy, I had no idea what was going on. So the analogy is, when the coals are lit, barbecue the steaks. And I'll tell you the story of when I heard this first. You may or may not be able to tell that one of the sports that I have tried in the past and kind of still dabble in at the moment is Olympic weightlifting. And I remember going to a session and I was feeling really drained that day. And I was like, I just don't know if I can do this. I just don't know if I can do the prescribed workout that has been set out for me today. And I went up and I said it to my coach. And I said, look, I just don't have the energy. And he turned to me and he said, well, when the coals are lit, barbecue the steaks. And I was like, are we having a barbecue? Can I have my steak medium rare, please? But what he really meant was that don't force it. When you need to take a rest, take a rest. When you need to back off, back off. And I'm sure these are the messages that you deliver to the athletes that you're coaching. But make sure you apply that same message to yourself. We've all heard of the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. The guys who have been lucky to travel over here recently, you would have had the safety announcement on the plane saying, apply your own oxygen before helping someone else. In the coaching environment, you're doing this on a voluntary basis. You're doing this because it's something that you enjoy as well. You want to get the best out of it. But make sure that you give yourself the opportunity to recover from it. Make sure you give yourself the compassion to take a step back when necessary. Now, I'm not saying you should just let people down, or that if you're not feeling it, don't turn up on game day and just say, look, you can look after yourselves. But just be aware that this is something that you are doing. The attitude that you bring into the sporting environment is going to translate to the athletes that you are coaching. They can pick up on your mood. They can pick up on your well-being. Look after your well-being first before you try and look after everyone else. So I suppose that brings us to this question that I asked you earlier. Are you a nice person? And I mean that in the sense of, are you looking after yourself? Are you aware of the biases that you potentially have that you might be bringing into your club or your environment? Are you being kind to the people that you are coaching? Are you maybe a little bit of one of those coaches who says that this is just part of life, and if they're not cut out for it, then maybe it's just a way to separate the wheat from the chaff? But most importantly, are you looking after yourself in this situation? So that's me asking you that question. Now I'm going to open it up to you. Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
I didn't see Simon's ego in your forward line.
We've asked him, and yeah.
So it might be worth asking him about the microaggressions and the macroaggressions that he has to put up with as a result of the colour of his skin and where he's come from and background, yeah? Because that's racist bullying.
Yeah.
And how it affects them, how it affects them on the pitch, on and off the pitch, is really important to analyse.
Yeah.
That, you know?
And
try and get the players involved, because we deal with this every single day of the week.
and they're, yeah.
Most sports organisations, apart from say the GAA for example, which are self-working on these, most sports organisations have no clue whatsoever how to deal with these microaggressions or the unconscious biases that we're talking about. You know? Not a clue whatsoever. No clue with it. Go away from it. So this was a lot of kids constantly protecting minorities backgrounds, so trying to get into the games, leave after a couple of weeks because of the abuse that they get.
Yeah, and one of the messages that we are trying to instill in the young people of Ireland, we actually have a Tackle Your Feelings schools programme, is to understand and appreciate. We actually have it's a section in our programme called How to Be Sound, and it's just appreciating the differences between people. And yes, it's more related around mental health and well-being, but the idea that not everyone is going to react, or not everyone is the same. We have a lot of differences. There are a lot of similarities as well. A lot of the stuff that we have been going through is a universal experience. But just because we've been going through the same thing doesn't necessarily mean that we have reacted the same way to it. There are very few people, I would say, but a few people who have actually been able to thrive over the last couple of years. They have found this situation potentially being locked down, working from home, not necessarily interacting with some people that they would have interacted with before, have actually found it beneficial, but that isn't necessarily the norm, I would say. But it does mean, and it does exemplify that not everyone reacts to the same situation in the same way. Something really interesting about the Tackle Your Feelings campaign is one of the original aims of the campaign was to help reduce the stigma around mental health and well-being, but we are very aware, and I'm sure Olivia is more aware than anyone else, that there is a lot of stigma still in place around these issues, and there's a lot of self-stigma. So we're very happy, and it kind of comes back into looking after yourself, we're very happy to say, I will support you through a very difficult time, but I'm not willing to be able to look for that support myself, or I find it very hard to find that support myself. So for a lot of athletes who are out there, it's actually very hard to come forward and say, I will be an ambassador for your campaign. I will share my story. I will show my vulnerability. Again, vulnerability is a word that we're almost not allowed to use in sport, especially at that elite level. And something we want to try and encourage people to see is that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to admit that things have been hard. It's okay to admit, I'm not getting on with my teammate. This is impacting me. The treatment that I am receiving is negatively impacting me, because when we get rid of that stigma, when we encourage these types of conversations, and hopefully this study will help with those kind of conversations, then we can help reduce the instances of those of bullying, of poor mental health, of struggling with poor mental health and poor mental well-being, because the more we talk about it and the more we as coaches and role models exemplify that as well, the more we can encourage people to do the same, especially our athletes. So I suppose just to finish off, because I know hopefully the sandwiches are out there waiting for us, just to give you some take-home messages So like I said, sport can be the perfect environment to promote positive mental health and well-being. The resources we gain through positive sporting environments can lead to other resource gain, and obviously can lead to those transferable skills that we talk about. That confidence, that optimism, that resilience that we gain in sport, we can put that in place in other environments as well. Know your own values. So like I said, check in with yourself, even if there's anything that you do after the end of the day. I know there's been a lot of really good information that has been shared, but even have a look at your own values. What are the things that you want to bring to the environment that you are working in? What are the things you want to bring into the environment that you are volunteering in? And can you help your team, if they don't have them in place at the moment, or even your athletes, set some values as well to kind of make sure, again, anti-bullying or being inclusive, not seeing differences or being respectful of differences can be one of those values. And the most important thing, like I said, is to look after yourself, be compassionate, share that same compassion that you want to share to your athletes to yourself. Allow yourself to take those breaks, allow yourselves to reach out for that support and find your own squad, your own support network, so that when these challenges do occur, that you will be able to lean on them as a resource as well. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for DCU and the lovely BeFore project for inviting me here and having us all here today as well.
So just to finish off, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all our speakers. They were exceptional. I learned a lot from them myself today. I'd like to say a special thank you to everyone who attended here today. It's brilliant to have you. I look forward to disseminating information with you throughout the project, getting feedback and providing that help. Another special thank you, I suppose, to our partners from Spain and Sweden and Murcia in Spain. Without them, this project wouldn't be possible. And hopefully, come the end of it, we will develop what we have set out to, and that being the interdisciplinary coach education program to tackle these intolerances within sport. I suppose the final thing I'd just like to say is, sport has the ability to significantly enhance people's quality of lives, improving people's health, their well-being, and also tackling many societal challenges that we face. The landscape of sport itself has changed enormously in recent times for the better, but still we face many challenges. In sport, we want good governance, integrity, equality. Sport as an activity for all, member protection, child safeguarding, and providing them safe, fair, inclusive sporting environments that are no longer, I suppose, aspirations, but are imperative to the sport itself. The BeFore project represents that opportunity to educate coaches and sporting organisations on the significant role that they play in promoting these inclusive environments, and also how they greatly impact athletes' experiences of sport. And that's what it's all about. So once again, I'd just like to say thank you. We have the final thing outside. We have a poster. We would like everyone to sign it. If you want to leave a message on it, you're more than welcome to. But we'd like everyone to sign it, as we will be getting it framed. And we have some refreshments outside for everyone. So thank you very much. It's been an excellent day, and I look forward to this project going forward.